Yesterday still hides fingerprints. Entire dynasties dissolved without surrender, yet impossible remnants lingered, defying logic with silent persistence. Every accepted narrative trembles when overlooked fragments refuse obedience. Watch closely. Certainty erodes, wonder awakens, and the next revelation may quietly unmake everything trusted until now. Forever afterward, unseen forces remain waiting. The Mediterranean light settles gently across the western edge of Alexandria, where broken columns, weathered limestone, and restless waves share the same horizon. Beneath modern streets, buried beneath centuries of rebuilding, earthquakes, and rising seas, another Alexandria is believed to exist, a silent city layered beneath the living one. Somewhere within that hidden landscape, many believe the final resting place of Cleopatra VII may still wait, untouched by time. Cleopatra VII, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, remains one of antiquity's most recognizable figures. Yet, despite centuries of scholarship, one remarkable detail has escaped discovery. No confirmed tomb has ever been found. For a queen whose life shaped the politics of the Mediterranean, whose alliances altered the fate of empires, and whose death marked the end of an age, the absence of her burial place is striking. Ancient writers provide only fragments. Plutarch records that after Cleopatra's death in 30 BC, she and Mark Antony were buried together, reportedly according to her wishes. Beyond that brief account, history grows unusually quiet. No precise location was preserved. No monument was identified with certainty. The trail simply fades into silence. One widely accepted possibility suggests that the royal tomb once stood somewhere within ancient Alexandria itself. The city was repeatedly damaged by earthquakes, tsunamis, and gradual subsidence over many centuries. Entire districts eventually slipped beneath the Mediterranean. Marine archaeologists have documented submerged palaces, temples, and harbor structures, demonstrating that significant portions of Cleopatra's world now lie underwater. If her mausoleum was constructed within the royal quarter, it may now rest beneath layers of sediment beneath the sea. Another compelling theory shifts attention several miles west of Alexandria to Taposiris Magna, an ancient temple complex dedicated primarily to Osiris. Excavations there have uncovered coins bearing Cleopatra's image, ceremonial artifacts, elaborate burials, underground passages, and architectural features suggesting the site once held exceptional importance. Some researchers believe Cleopatra intentionally chose a sacred location associated with resurrection symbolism, hoping to link herself and Antony with the eternal myth of Osiris and Isis. Yet no definitive evidence has emerged. Each excavation raises new expectations before yielding more questions than answers. Hidden chambers appear promising before revealing ordinary construction. Sealed passageways inspire anticipation, only to lead toward empty spaces or damaged foundations. Every discovery expands knowledge of the ancient world while leaving the central mystery untouched. Other ideas venture further beyond conventional scholarship. Some speculate the tomb was deliberately concealed by loyal followers determined to prevent desecration by Octavian's forces. Others imagine that political motives erased references to its location, allowing memory itself to become the final barrier. A few even wonder whether the burial described by ancient historians occurred exactly as recorded, or whether later generations inherited a carefully crafted narrative rather than literal events. Such possibilities remain difficult to prove, yet they endure because the evidence remains incomplete. Perhaps that is why Cleopatra's missing tomb continues to fascinate. It occupies a rare space where documented history meets enduring uncertainty. Every buried foundation, submerged wall, and unopened chamber invites another careful search. Somewhere beneath stone, sand, or sea, the answer may already exist, waiting not to rewrite history, but simply to complete a story that has remained unfinished for more than 2,000 years. If Cleopatra's missing tomb reminds us that even the greatest rulers can disappear into silence, the next mystery reveals that sometimes an entire empire can lose something just as symbolic. Not a palace, not a city, but a single object whose absence echoed across centuries, a Roman eagle carried into battle and never confidently recovered. Morning mist often settles over the wide plains near the ancient town of Kare, in what is now southeastern Turkey. The landscape appears quiet today, stretching beneath open skies with little hint of the catastrophe that unfolded here in 53 BC. Yet, beneath this ordinary terrain lies the memory of one of Rome's most devastating military defeats, a battle remembered not only for the lives that were lost, but for the disappearance of an object that represented the very soul of a Roman legion. The eagle standard, known as the Aquila, was far more than a military emblem. Forged from precious metal and carried by a specially appointed standard-bearer, it embodied the honor, identity, and spirit of an entire legion. Roman soldiers swore oaths beneath its wings. To abandon it was unthinkable. To lose it in battle was considered one of the deepest disgraces imaginable. That is precisely what happened when Marcus Licinius Crassus marched east. Crassus, remembered as one of the wealthiest men in Roman history and a member of the first triumvirate alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey, sought military glory to match his immense fortune. Hoping to conquer the Parthian Empire, he led roughly 7 legions into unfamiliar territory. Instead, his forces encountered a remarkably disciplined enemy, whose mounted archers and armored cavalry transformed the battlefield into a relentless demonstration of mobility and precision. Ancient historians describe clouds of arrows darkening the sky while Roman formations struggled to respond. The legions, trained for close combat, found themselves trapped against an opponent that refused to fight on Roman terms. As exhaustion mounted and casualties increased, order gradually collapsed. Crassus himself never returned. In the aftermath, several Roman eagle standards were captured by the Parthians. The exact number remains uncertain, but their loss carried consequences far beyond the battlefield. Across Rome, the disappearance of these sacred symbols became a lasting wound to imperial pride. Coins, speeches, and official records would later emphasize not merely military defeat, but the determination to recover the missing eagles. Decades later, the Roman Emperor Augustus achieved what many regarded as a diplomatic triumph. Rather than launching another costly invasion, he negotiated the return of standards from the Parthian king in 20 BC. Roman monuments celebrated the event as a restoration of national honor. The famous statue known as the Augustus of Prima Porta even depicts a Parthian figure returning a Roman standard. Yet, a lingering uncertainty remains. Were all of Crassus's lost eagles truly returned? Some historians believe the surviving records simply celebrate the recovery of every captured standard. Others note that ancient sources are not entirely consistent, leaving room for doubt about exactly how many were recovered and whether every lost Aquila came home. Documentation from the period is incomplete, and much depends upon interpretations written decades after the events themselves. This uncertainty has encouraged generations of speculation. One theory proposes that at least one eagle never reached Rome because it had already been hidden, melted down, or ceremonially buried by its captors. Another suggests that a surviving standard may still lie somewhere near the battlefield itself, concealed beneath layers of earth disturbed by nearly 2,000 years of erosion, agriculture, and settlement. Excavations throughout the wider region have revealed weapons, fortifications, coins, and traces of ancient conflict, yet no confirmed legionary eagle connected to Kare has ever emerged. If such an artifact still exists, identifying it would require extraordinary evidence. Roman standards were crafted with exceptional care, but precious metals were also highly valuable, making them likely targets for recycling during later centuries. More speculative ideas reach even farther. Some propose that captured Roman prisoners carried the eagle deep into Central Asia, where isolated communities may have preserved fragments of Roman military traditions. Others imagine that a forgotten sanctuary, hidden fortress, or royal treasury once safeguarded the emblem before history quietly erased every record of its existence. These suggestions remain intriguing but unverified, resting largely upon coincidence, fragmented accounts, and enduring curiosity rather than archaeological proof. If the lost eagle of Crassus reminds us that a single missing object can reshape the memory of an empire, the next mystery asks us to look upward instead of downward. Sometimes the greatest historical puzzle is not buried beneath the earth, but written across the night sky, seen for a brief moment, recorded in a handful of ancient words, and never fully understood again. On a clear winter evening, the sky above the hills of Palestine appears almost timeless. Countless stars shimmer against the darkness, just as they have for thousands of years. Long before telescopes, satellites, or modern astronomy, these distant lights guided travelers, marked the changing seasons, and inspired stories that blended observation with meaning. Among all the celestial objects ever described in ancient literature, none has inspired more enduring curiosity than the Star of Bethlehem. The account appears in the Gospel of Matthew, where a remarkable star is said to have drawn learned visitors from the east toward the birthplace of Jesus. The narrative describes a heavenly sign that announced an extraordinary event and guided the travelers until they reached their destination. Yet, beyond this brief description, the historical trail becomes surprisingly difficult to follow. No single astronomical record identifies the event with certainty. For centuries, historians, astronomers, theologians, and archaeologists have attempted to determine whether the star described in the ancient account corresponded to a real celestial phenomenon. Rather than dismissing the story or accepting one explanation outright, many researchers have approached it as a historical puzzle, one that may preserve the memory of an unusual event witnessed more than 2,000 years ago. One of the earliest and most widely discussed possibilities involves a planetary conjunction. In 7 BC, Jupiter and Saturn appeared unusually close together in the constellation Pisces during a rare series of alignments. Ancient sky watchers, particularly scholars in Mesopotamia, carefully observed such events and often interpreted them as signs connected to kingdoms, rulers, or major political changes. Some researchers suggest that this remarkable conjunction may have carried symbolic significance for observers familiar with ancient astrology. Others point to an even brighter candidate. Chinese astronomical records describe what appears to have been a guest star, visible in 5 BC. The term could refer to a comet or a nova, a star that suddenly becomes much brighter before gradually fading from view. If such an object remained visible for several weeks or months, it might explain why ancient observers regarded it as an event worthy of careful attention. However, the surviving descriptions are brief, leaving modern scholars unable to determine exactly what was seen. Comets have also entered the discussion. Throughout history, these luminous visitors have captured human imagination. Their glowing tails and slow movement across the heavens made them impossible to ignore. Yet ancient cultures often viewed comets as warnings rather than joyful signs, leading some historians to question whether they would have been associated with the birth of an important ruler. Then there is the possibility that no ordinary astronomical object fully explains the account. The description in Matthew contains details that have challenged researchers for generations. The star appears to guide travelers and eventually seems to stop over a particular location. From a modern astronomical perspective, stars and planets do not behave in this literal way. Some scholars therefore argue that the language may be symbolic, reflecting theological themes rather than precise astronomical observation. Others suggest the account combines an actual celestial event with literary expression, preserving both historical memory and spiritual meaning. Still more speculative ideas extend beyond conventional interpretations. Some propose that an exceptionally rare atmospheric phenomenon created an unforgettable visual effect unlike anything commonly recorded. Others imagine that an astronomical event, now impossible to reconstruct, coincided with cultural expectations in ways that transformed it into one of history's most enduring stories. A few even wonder whether important ancient observations were recorded in documents that have since disappeared, leaving only fragments of a much larger tradition. Despite centuries of investigation, no explanation has achieved universal acceptance. Modern astronomical software can recreate ancient skies with remarkable precision, yet certainty remains elusive. Every proposed solution answers some questions while raising others. The deeper researchers look into the evidence, the more complex the mystery becomes. Perhaps that is what makes the Star of Bethlehem so compelling. It exists at the intersection of astronomy, history, archaeology, and belief, where each discipline illuminates part of the picture without revealing the whole. Somewhere within forgotten records, overlooked observations, or the silent movements of the ancient heavens, the truth may still be waiting, its light long faded from the sky, yet its mystery continuing to shine across the centuries. If the Star of Bethlehem reminds us that some mysteries may be written across the heavens, the next one returns us to the earth, into a forest where silence has endured for 2,000 years. Here, the missing pieces are not distant lights but sacred military emblems, lost in one of Rome's darkest hours and still surrounded by unanswered questions. Dense woodland stretches across the rolling landscape of northern Germany, where mist lingers between ancient oaks and narrow marshes. Even today, the forest feels strangely enclosed. Sound seems to fade beneath the canopy, and every winding path disappears into shadow. It is here, or somewhere very much like it, that one of the Roman Empire's greatest disasters unfolded in AD 9, a catastrophe remembered simply as the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. For 3 days, rain, mud, and dense woodland turned disciplined Roman formations into scattered groups struggling to survive. Publius Quinctilius Varus, governor of Germania, had been leading 3 experienced legions, Legio XVII, XVIII, and XIX, when they marched into an elaborate ambush prepared by Arminius, a Germanic leader who had once served within the Roman military itself. Trust became the empire's greatest weakness. The guide became the strategist. The familiar road became a trap. Ancient historians describe confusion rather than glorious combat. Wagons became obstacles. Armor grew heavier in the relentless rain. Long marching columns found themselves unable to form the tight defensive lines that had made Rome nearly unstoppable elsewhere. Attacks came suddenly from the trees before disappearing back into the forest. By the time the fighting ended, 3 entire legions had effectively ceased to exist. Along with thousands of soldiers, Rome lost something even more symbolic. Each legion carried its own eagle standard, the aquila. These magnificent emblems represented honor, unity, and the spirit of the legion itself. Their loss was considered an unbearable disgrace. To capture a Roman eagle was not merely a military victory. It was a profound psychological blow against the empire's confidence and prestige. Historical sources agree that all 3 legionary eagles fell into Germanic hands. Rome never forgot. The Emperor Augustus is said to have been deeply shaken by the disaster, reportedly crying, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." Whether those exact words were spoken cannot be confirmed, but they reflect the enormous impact the defeat left upon Roman memory. The legion numbers 17, 18, and 19 were never used again, an extraordinary decision that underscored the scale of the tragedy. Years later, Rome launched campaigns into Germania with one objective extending beyond military revenge: recover the lost eagles. According to surviving records, the first eagle was recovered during the campaigns of Germanicus in AD 15. Another reportedly returned to Roman hands in AD 16. A third was recovered decades later during the reign of Emperor Claudius, apparently from a Germanic tribe farther from the original battlefield. These recoveries were celebrated as major political victories, symbols that Rome could restore at least part of what had been lost. Yet, the story is not entirely complete. Ancient accounts differ in detail, and the precise circumstances surrounding each recovery remain uncertain. Were these truly the original standards carried by Varus's legions? Had they been passed between tribes as prestigious trophies? Were they hidden in sacred groves before eventually changing hands? The surviving texts offer glimpses, but not a continuous narrative. Modern archaeology has added remarkable pieces to the puzzle. Excavations at Calcrisi, widely considered the strongest candidate for the battlefield, have uncovered Roman armor, weapons, coins, fragments of equipment, and human remains that vividly illustrate the scale of the ambush. Every discovery strengthens the case for the site's connection to Varus's defeat. Yet none of the famous legionary eagles has been recovered there. Their absence has encouraged continuing speculation. Some researchers suggest that the standards were quickly removed from the battlefield and carried to distant ceremonial sites, making their recovery at Calcris unlikely. Others believe they may have been dismantled, with precious metals melted down while symbolic components were preserved elsewhere. There is also the possibility that ancient Roman accounts simplified later recoveries for political purposes, leaving unanswered questions about what was actually returned to the empire. More speculative theories reach even further. Some imagine that one eagle never entered Roman possession again and still lies buried beneath an undiscovered ritual site. Others wonder whether fragments survive unnoticed within museum collections, separated long ago from the historical context that once gave them meaning. Without inscriptions or definitive archaeological evidence, such ideas remain impossible to confirm. Perhaps that is the enduring power of the missing eagles of Varus's legions. They remind us that even the greatest empires could lose symbols they believed would endure forever. Somewhere beneath layers of forest soil, within forgotten sacred ground, or hidden inside an artifact not yet fully understood, another chapter of Rome's greatest defeat may still be waiting to emerge from the silence. If the missing eagles of Varus remind us that history can lose even its most treasured symbols, the next mystery concerns something far less tangible. Not a sacred emblem buried beneath forgotten soil, but nearly 2 decades of silence. Sometimes, what history chooses not to record becomes as compelling as anything it preserves. The hills of Galilee awaken slowly beneath the first light of morning. Stone houses emerge from the shadows, narrow paths wind between olive trees, and the distant sound of craftsmen beginning their work echoes through the quiet air. In the small village of Nazareth, life during the 1st century would have followed familiar rhythms: families gathering water, farmers tending fields, merchants traveling dusty roads, and children growing into adulthood within a close-knit community. It is within this ordinary setting that one of history's most remarkable unanswered questions quietly begins. The life of Jesus of Nazareth is among the most extensively studied subjects in human history. Yet, the surviving historical record contains a striking gap. The Gospels describe his birth, recount a single episode in Jerusalem when he was about 12 years old, and then fall almost completely silent until the beginning of his public ministry around the age of 30. Nearly 18 years pass without detailed explanation. For historians, this silence is not unusual in one sense. Ancient biographies often focused on the events considered most significant, leaving large portions of a person's life undocumented. Everyday years, especially those before public prominence, were frequently omitted. Still, considering the extraordinary influence Jesus would later have upon world history, the absence of information naturally invites continued curiosity. The most widely accepted explanation is also the simplest. Many scholars believe Jesus remained in Nazareth, living an ordinary life within his family and working as a craftsman. The Greek word used in the Gospels suggests someone skilled in building or woodworking, though it may also refer more broadly to construction using stone and timber. In this view, the so-called lost years were not dramatic at all. They were years of labor, family responsibilities, religious observance, and gradual preparation before public ministry began. Archaeological discoveries have helped illuminate that everyday world. Excavations around Nazareth have revealed homes, agricultural terraces, storage pits, ritual baths, and workshops dating to the early 1st century. These findings provide valuable insight into the environment in which Jesus likely lived. Rather than uncovering dramatic revelations, archaeology paints a picture of a modest rural community shaped by both Jewish traditions and the wider influence of the Roman world. Yet, the silence within the written record has encouraged many alternative possibilities. Some ancient writings outside the New Testament attempted to fill the gap with stories describing miraculous events during Jesus' youth. These texts, often referred to as infancy gospels, appeared generations after the events they describe and are generally not regarded by historians as reliable historical sources. Instead, they reflect later traditions, theological reflection, and the desire of early communities to imagine the years left unexplained by earlier accounts. Other theories extend much farther. One long-standing tradition suggests that Jesus may have traveled beyond Judea during these unrecorded years. Various writers have proposed journeys to Egypt, where important Jewish communities had existed for centuries. Others have speculated about travels eastward into Persia or even India, arguing that such experiences might explain similarities between certain ethical teachings and ideas found elsewhere in the ancient world. These proposals have attracted considerable public interest, yet they remain unsupported by contemporary historical evidence. No verified documents from the 1st century place Jesus in these distant regions, and the earliest surviving sources remain silent regarding such journeys. The theories persist largely because the historical gap allows room for imagination where direct evidence is absent. Still, other researchers suggest that the answer may not involve distant travel at all, but overlooked details hidden within familiar landscapes. Could undiscovered inscriptions, private letters, or forgotten archives someday offer a glimpse into these missing years? Archaeology has repeatedly shown that even small discoveries, a fragment of papyrus, a household inscription, or an overlooked settlement, can transform our understanding of the ancient world. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not what happened during those 18 years, but why so little was considered necessary to record. Was the silence intentional, reflecting the priorities of ancient biography? Or were accounts once written that simply did not survive the passage of time? For now, the hills of Galilee remain quiet, their stones revealing fragments of everyday life while preserving the larger mystery. Somewhere between the ordinary routines of a village and the beginning of a ministry that changed history, an unwritten chapter still waits, inviting us to wonder whether its secrets have truly vanished or simply remain undiscovered. If the silence surrounding Jesus' lost years reminds us that missing pages can become some of history's greatest mysteries, the next enigma begins with a document that did survive, but one unlike any other. Instead of parchment or papyrus, its secrets were engraved into metal, as though its creators believed the message was too important to trust to anything less enduring. The cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea rise in pale layers beneath an unforgiving sun. Wind sweeps across the barren landscape, carrying fine dust through narrow ravines where caves disappear into the limestone. At first glance, the region appears empty, almost untouched. Yet, hidden within these rocky chambers were discoveries that transformed the study of the ancient world. Among the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, one artifact stands completely apart from the rest, a scroll fashioned not from leather, but from thin sheets of hammered copper. Time had not been kind to it. Unlike parchment, which could simply be unrolled, the copper had corroded over centuries until opening it without destroying the text seemed impossible. When researchers finally devised a careful method to cut the scroll into narrow strips during the 1950s, they revealed something unexpected. Rather than containing religious teachings, hymns, or biblical manuscripts like the other scrolls, this document presented what appeared to be an extraordinary inventory. Line after line described hidden caches of gold, silver, sacred vessels, and valuable objects. The descriptions were remarkably specific. Distances were measured. Landmarks were identified. Wells, ruined buildings, cisterns, hillsides, and valleys were listed as though the author expected someone familiar with the landscape to follow the directions precisely. Altogether, the scroll appears to describe dozens of separate hiding places, with estimates that, if taken literally, would amount to an astonishing quantity of treasure. No confirmed cache has ever been found. The copper scroll immediately raised a question that continues to divide historians and archaeologists. Was it an authentic inventory of hidden wealth, or something else entirely? One widely accepted possibility suggests the document records valuables concealed before the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. As conflict spread across Judea, communities may have hidden sacred objects and precious metals to prevent them from falling into Roman hands. If so, the scroll could preserve genuine locations known only to a select group entrusted with protecting these treasures during a time of crisis. Others believe the list may refer to wealth connected with the Second Temple itself. Ancient sources describe the temple as possessing immense riches accumulated over generations. Some researchers have wondered whether priests or caretakers secretly dispersed portions of that wealth before Jerusalem fell. Yet, direct evidence linking the copper scroll to the temple remains elusive, and many of the locations described cannot be identified with confidence today. The landscape itself has changed dramatically over 2,000 years. Earthquakes, erosion, floods, construction, and shifting place names have altered valleys and hillsides beyond recognition. A landmark that seemed unmistakable to its original readers may now lie buried beneath sediment or modern development. Even if the directions were once perfectly accurate, following them today may be far more difficult than the text suggests. Not everyone believes the treasure ever existed. Some scholars argue that the quantities of gold and silver listed are so enormous that they seem unrealistic for the period. According to this interpretation, the scroll may have served a symbolic, ceremonial, or literary purpose rather than functioning as a practical guide. Others suggest it could represent an archival record copied from an earlier source, preserving information that was already centuries old when the document itself was created. Beyond these mainstream interpretations lie even more speculative possibilities. Some imagine that at least part of the treasure has already been discovered in secrecy, its recovery never publicly acknowledged. Others propose that the scroll intentionally conceals its true meaning through coded language, with familiar landmarks serving as references understood only by members of a particular community. There are even suggestions that certain locations remain inaccessible beneath collapsed caves or unexplored chambers still hidden within the wilderness surrounding the Dead Sea. Despite decades of surveys and archaeological exploration, none of the major treasures described in the Copper Scroll has been conclusively identified. Every promising excavation seems to uncover another fragment of history, yet never the wealth that made the document so famous. The scroll remains unique among ancient manuscripts, not because of what it teaches, but because of what it appears to promise. Perhaps that is why the Copper Scroll continues to fascinate both scholars and explorers. It occupies the uncertain space between historical record and enduring puzzle, where every engraved line invites another search across the desert. Somewhere among forgotten caves, vanished landmarks, or places no longer recognized by their ancient names, the answer may still lie waiting beneath stone and silence, untouched since the day its mysterious inventory was first carved into copper. If the Copper Scroll reminds us that a single ancient document can preserve mysteries no excavation has yet resolved, the next puzzle begins with another surviving text. This time, however, the mystery is not hidden beneath desert stone or engraved into metal. It is hidden within dates, where a few lines of ancient writing have inspired centuries of careful investigation. Morning sunlight washes across the weathered limestone hills of Palestine, illuminating roads that once connected villages, marketplaces, and administrative centers of the Roman Empire. Merchants, travelers, soldiers, and tax officials would have crossed these same routes, carrying news, goods, and imperial decrees from one province to another. Every empire depends upon records, and every record depends upon time. Yet, sometimes, the greatest mystery is not what happened, but precisely when. Among the many historical questions surrounding the early 1st century, few have generated as much scholarly discussion as the census of Quirinius. The Gospel of Luke describes a census that brought Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem, stating that it occurred during the governorship of Quirinius in Syria. At first glance, the statement appears straightforward. Yet, when historians compare this account with surviving Roman records and other ancient sources, an unexpected chronological puzzle emerges. The principal difficulty centers on the career of Publius Sulpicius Quirinius, a respected Roman official whose life is documented through inscriptions and historical writings. Most scholars agree that Quirinius served as governor of the Roman province of Syria beginning around AD 6. During that period, Judea had recently come under direct Roman administration following the removal of Archelaus, the son of Herod the Great. Ancient historian Josephus describes a census conducted under Quirinius at this time, noting that it provoked significant resistance among the local population. The challenge arises because Herod the Great is generally believed to have died several years earlier, traditionally around 4 BC. The Gospel of Matthew places the birth of Jesus during Herod's reign, while Luke connects the event with the census associated with Quirinius. If both references are understood in their most direct chronological sense, they appear difficult to reconcile. The difference may represent nearly a decade, a substantial gap in ancient historical dating. For generations, historians have explored possible explanations. One proposal suggests that Quirinius may have exercised authority in Syria during an earlier administrative role before his well-documented governorship. Some inscriptions indicate that he held important military responsibilities in the region before AD 6, leading a number of researchers to wonder whether an earlier census or registration could have occurred under his supervision in some capacity. However, no surviving evidence conclusively confirms such a census. Another interpretation focuses on the wording of Luke's account itself. Some scholars argue that the Greek text allows for alternative translations, potentially referring to a census that occurred before Quirinius became governor rather than during his official term. Linguistic analysis has produced thoughtful arguments on both sides, yet no universal agreement has emerged regarding the most accurate reading. Others broaden the discussion by examining how censuses functioned throughout the Roman Empire. Imperial registrations were not always simultaneous across different territories. Local political conditions often influenced how and when taxation or population counts were carried out. Some historians therefore suggest that the census described in Luke may reflect a gradual administrative process extending across several years, rather than a single event completed at one specific moment. While this possibility offers additional flexibility, direct documentation remains limited. Archaeology has contributed valuable context without fully resolving the question. Inscriptions, administrative records, Roman milestones, taxation documents from Egypt, and excavated government centers have deepened modern understanding of how Rome governed its provinces. These discoveries reveal an empire of remarkable bureaucratic complexity, where local practices frequently intersected with imperial authority. Yet, despite these insights, no archaeological discovery has definitively identified the exact census described in Luke. The absence of evidence has naturally encouraged more speculative ideas. Some researchers have proposed that portions of the Roman administrative archive simply disappeared over time, leaving historians with an incomplete picture of provincial governance. Others suggest that political transitions within Judea created overlapping responsibilities among Roman officials, complicating later historical reconstruction. A few even wonder whether future excavations might uncover overlooked inscriptions or papyrus records capable of clarifying the chronology in unexpected ways. For now, every explanation carries both strengths and unanswered questions. The surviving texts are ancient, valuable, and remarkably close to the events they describe by historical standards, yet they remain open to careful interpretation. The archaeological record continues to expand, but each new discovery seems to illuminate only part of the larger picture. Perhaps that is the enduring fascination of the census of Quirinius. It reminds us that history is often assembled from fragments rather than certainties, where a single date can influence the interpretation of an entire era. Somewhere within an undiscovered archive, an overlooked inscription, or a forgotten administrative record buried beneath the soil of the ancient Roman world, the missing piece may still exist, waiting quietly to place one of history's most debated chronologies into clearer focus. If the chronology surrounding the census of Quirinius reminds us that a few uncertain dates can challenge centuries of historical interpretation, the next mystery shifts from disputed records to a sudden death that altered the future of an empire. Sometimes, history is not transformed by a missing document, but by the unexpected silence left behind when a single life comes to an abrupt end. The ruins of Antioch, near the banks of the Orontes River in what is now southern Turkey, still overlook a landscape that once stood among the Roman Empire's greatest cities. Marble colonnades have long since collapsed, temples have faded into scattered stone, and bustling avenues have surrendered to time. Yet beneath these quiet remains lingers the memory of a young commander whose death shocked Rome and gave rise to one of antiquity's most enduring political mysteries. His name was Germanicus Julius Caesar. Admired by soldiers, respected by senators, and deeply loved by the Roman public, Germanicus was widely regarded as one of the empire's brightest hopes. He was the adopted son of Emperor Tiberius and a gifted military leader whose campaigns beyond the Rhine restored Roman confidence after the devastating defeat of Varus in the Teutoburg forest. Victories against Germanic tribes earned him lasting fame, while his personal character distinguished him from many ambitious figures who surrounded the imperial court. To many Romans, Germanicus appeared destined to become emperor. In AD 17, he departed Rome on an important mission to oversee the eastern provinces. Officially, his assignment involved diplomacy, administration, and maintaining stability throughout a strategically vital region. Ancient writers describe him traveling through Greece, Asia Minor, Egypt, and Syria, receiving enthusiastic welcomes from local populations wherever he went. His popularity seemed only to grow. Then, without warning, everything changed. While staying in Antioch in AD 19, Germanicus became seriously ill. Ancient accounts describe a gradual decline rather than a sudden collapse. Despite medical attention, his condition worsened until he finally died at only 33 years of age. News of his death spread rapidly across the empire, triggering widespread grief and immediate suspicion. Had Germanicus died of natural illness, or had someone arranged his death? The principal ancient sources, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio, offer overlapping but not identical accounts. Tacitus, writing several decades later, presents perhaps the most detailed narrative. He records widespread rumors that Germanicus believed he had been poisoned, and describes reports of mysterious objects discovered within his residence, including fragments associated with curses, human remains, ashes, and inscriptions invoking harmful magic. Whether these objects genuinely existed or reflected the fears of grieving supporters remains impossible to determine. Attention soon focused upon Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso, the governor of Syria. Relations between Piso and Germanicus had reportedly deteriorated during their time together in the East. Ancient sources describe disagreements over military authority, provincial administration, and personal conduct. Following Germanicus's death, Piso was accused of poisoning him, revoked orders issued by the deceased commander, and attempted to regain military influence before eventually returning to Rome to face trial. The proceedings became one of the empire's most closely watched legal cases. Piso denied responsibility. The evidence presented remains difficult to evaluate today because surviving accounts were written long afterward and often reflected political perspectives as much as courtroom testimony. Before the trial reached its conclusion, Piso himself died under mysterious circumstances. Officially, his death was ruled a suicide. Yet, even this explanation failed to silence speculation. Many Romans wondered whether Piso had acted alone. Others suspected that he served more powerful interests. The name most frequently whispered was that of Emperor Tiberius himself. Germanicus's immense popularity naturally invited comparison with the reigning emperor, whose reserved personality contrasted sharply with his nephew's public appeal. Ancient historians preserve rumors suggesting that Tiberius viewed Germanicus as a political rival, though none provide definitive evidence linking him directly to the young commander's death. Modern historians remain cautious, recognizing that hostility toward Tiberius increased in later literary traditions, potentially shaping how these events were remembered. Medical explanations have also entered the discussion. Some researchers argue that Germanicus may have succumbed to an infectious disease common in the eastern Mediterranean, where malaria, typhoid fever, or other serious illnesses posed constant risks to travelers. Ancient medicine possessed only limited understanding of such conditions, making sudden deterioration entirely plausible without requiring deliberate poisoning. Yet, certainty remains beyond reach. No physical remains capable of modern forensic analysis survive. No official confession was ever recorded. Every surviving account passed through generations of copying, interpretation, and political memory before reaching the present day. Archaeology has revealed magnificent cities, inscriptions, military camps, and imperial monuments from Germanicus's lifetime, but none has uncovered the decisive evidence capable of resolving the mystery surrounding his final days. Perhaps that is why the death of Germanicus continues to intrigue historians. It stands at the intersection of politics, ambition, loyalty, and rumor, where the fate of one remarkable individual may have altered the course of Roman history. Somewhere within an undiscovered archive, an overlooked inscription, or a forgotten letter buried beneath the ruins of the ancient world, another piece of the story may still remain, waiting quietly to reveal whether Germanicus was claimed by illness, conspiracy, or a truth that history has yet to recover. If the mysterious death of Germanicus reminds us that a single, unanswered question can linger long after an empire has faded, the next mystery begins not with a lost ruler, but with a forgotten name. Sometimes, history preserves a person's influence while allowing their identity to disappear almost completely. Along the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea, the limestone cliffs of Qumran rise above a landscape shaped by wind, salt, and silence. The caves scattered across these barren hills appear unremarkable from a distance. Yet, within them rested hundreds of ancient manuscripts for nearly 2,000 years. Hidden inside clay jars and protected by the dry desert climate, these scrolls survived wars, changing kingdoms, and the slow passage of centuries. Together, they transformed our understanding of Jewish life during the final centuries before the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. Among the many figures mentioned within these writings, one remains especially elusive. He is known simply as the teacher of righteousness. Unlike kings, governors, or high priests whose names appear in multiple historical records, this individual is never clearly identified. The scrolls describe him with respect and authority, portraying him as a leader chosen to reveal the proper interpretation of sacred law. He appears as a central figure within the community responsible for preserving many of the manuscripts, yet his personal name, family background, and exact place in history remain uncertain. The mystery begins with what the scrolls do reveal. Several texts describe conflicts between the teacher of righteousness and an opponent referred to as the wicked priest. The language suggests a period of intense disagreement involving religious authority, legitimate leadership, and the correct interpretation of Jewish law. The teacher is presented as a persecuted but faithful guide, while the identity of his rival remains equally uncertain. Both figures seem to belong to a historical setting familiar to the original readers, but frustratingly unfamiliar to us. Who was this remarkable teacher? The most widely accepted view places him sometime during the 2nd century BC, when political and religious tensions shaped Judea under the Hasmonean dynasty. According to this interpretation, the teacher may have been a priest who rejected what he believed to be corruption within the Jerusalem priesthood. Separated from the religious establishment, he and his followers may have formed an isolated community dedicated to preserving what they considered the authentic covenant and preparing for God's future intervention. Archaeological discoveries at Qumran have strengthened the connection between the site and the scrolls. Excavations have uncovered communal buildings, ritual baths, pottery workshops, water systems, dining areas, and cemeteries dating to the late Second Temple period. While scholars continue to debate the precise function of the settlement, many believe it served as a center for the community that copied or preserved at least some of the manuscripts. Yet, archaeology cannot tell us the teacher's name. Other interpretations challenge the traditional picture entirely. Some researchers argue that the scrolls may have originated in Jerusalem before being hidden in the caves during the Roman advance in the 1st century AD. If so, the teacher of righteousness may never have lived at Qumran at all. Instead, he could have belonged to a much broader religious movement whose writings were later carried into the desert for safekeeping. The identity of the wicked priest is equally debated. Various historical figures have been proposed, including several Hasmonean rulers and high priests whose careers overlapped periods of political unrest. Each candidate appears to fit certain details while conflicting with others. Without explicit names, certainty remains impossible. More speculative theories extend beyond mainstream scholarship. Over the past century, some writers have suggested connections between the teacher of righteousness and later religious figures, proposing that echoes of his teachings survived into the 1st century AD. Others have imagined that he belonged to an otherwise unknown movement whose influence extended far beyond the Dead Sea region. These ideas have attracted considerable public attention, but they remain highly controversial and are not supported by clear historical evidence. Still, the mystery endures because the surviving texts are both remarkably informative and profoundly incomplete. They preserve theology, community rules, prophetic interpretation, and vivid accounts of conflict. Yet, the central figure himself remains concealed behind a title rather than a name. It is as though history intentionally left one essential page unwritten. Perhaps that is what makes the teacher of righteousness so compelling. The scrolls allow us to hear his voice without ever introducing the man behind it. Somewhere beneath the sands of the Judean wilderness, inside an undiscovered cave, or within an overlooked manuscript resting in an archive, another fragment may still exist. If it does, it may reveal not only the identity of a forgotten teacher, but also a chapter of ancient history that has remained hidden in silence for more than 2,000 years. If the identity of the teacher of righteousness reminds us that history can preserve a powerful legacy while allowing the individual behind it to fade into anonymity, the next mystery tells the opposite story. Here, the name has survived across nearly 2,000 years, yet the final moments of the person herself remain hidden behind the silence of history. The rolling hills of eastern England are often wrapped in a soft morning mist. Ancient pathways cross open fields, rivers wind quietly through broad valleys, and scattered earthworks hint at settlements that once stood here long before modern towns emerged. Beneath these landscapes lie traces of one of Roman Britain's most violent chapters, a rebellion so devastating that entire cities were reduced to ash. Yet, after the smoke cleared, its legendary leader seemed to vanish almost completely. Her name was Boudica. Queen of the Iceni tribe, Boudica became one of the most formidable opponents Rome ever faced. According to the Roman historians Tacitus and Cassius Dio, the revolt began after the death of her husband, Prasutagus. Although he had attempted to preserve peace by naming both his daughters and the Roman emperor as heirs, Roman officials ignored the arrangement. Ancient sources describe the confiscation of property, harsh treatment of local elites, and the public humiliation of Boudica herself. Whether every detail survives exactly as it occurred remains uncertain, but there is little doubt that profound political tensions ignited a widespread uprising. What followed shocked the Roman Empire. Boudica united several British tribes under a single cause. Together, they overwhelmed Roman settlements, destroying Camulodunum, modern Colchester, before advancing against Londinium and Verulamium. Archaeological excavations have uncovered thick layers of burned debris within these cities, providing striking evidence of the destruction described in ancient accounts. Charred buildings, collapsed structures, melted objects, and ash deposits continue to testify to the extraordinary scale of the rebellion. For a brief moment, it appeared that Roman control of Britain itself might collapse. Then came the decisive battle. The Roman governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, gathered the forces still available to him and confronted the vastly larger British army at an unknown location. Ancient writers describe a disciplined Roman victory despite overwhelming numerical odds. Thousands of Britons reportedly perished, while Roman losses remained comparatively small. Although the exact figures are almost certainly exaggerated, the outcome itself is generally accepted. After that battle, the historical record grows unexpectedly quiet. Tacitus writes that Boudica ended her own life by taking poison rather than allowing herself to be captured. Cassius Dio offers a different version, suggesting that she fell ill and died shortly afterward before receiving an elaborate burial. Neither historian claims to have witnessed these events firsthand, and both wrote decades after the revolt had ended. Their accounts agree that Boudica disappeared from history, yet they differ on how her story concluded. No confirmed grave has ever been found. That absence has inspired centuries of speculation. Across Britain, numerous locations have been proposed as Boudica's final resting place. Hillsides, ancient burial mounds, remote valleys, and even places beneath modern cities have all entered local tradition. One of the most enduring legends claims she lies beneath London's King's Cross station, though this idea appears to have emerged only in relatively recent folklore and lacks archaeological support. Other suggested sites rest upon local stories passed down through generations, rather than historical evidence. Archaeologists have searched for traces connected to the rebellion itself, uncovering Roman military camps, destroyed settlements, coins, weapons, and burned structures. Yet nothing conclusively identifies where the queen herself died, or where, if anywhere, she was buried. If Tacitus's account is correct, her followers may have concealed her remains in secrecy to prevent Roman desecration. If Cassius Dio's description is closer to reality, any burial place may simply have been lost through time, agriculture, construction, and changing landscapes. More speculative ideas extend beyond the surviving texts. Some suggest that Boudica escaped the battlefield entirely and lived her remaining years in hiding among allied tribes. Others wonder whether Roman authorities intentionally suppressed details surrounding her death to discourage future rebellion or to shape the historical narrative in their favor. Without contemporary British written accounts, the story survives almost entirely through Roman voices, leaving historians to weigh both valuable information and possible political perspective. Perhaps that silence is itself part of the mystery. Boudica's revolt left unmistakable marks upon the archaeological record, visible in layers of fire and destruction that still emerge beneath modern streets. Yet the woman who inspired that uprising seems to have stepped beyond the reach of certainty. Somewhere beneath an overlooked mound within an unexcavated landscape, or hidden beneath centuries of ordinary soil, the final chapter of her life may still remain undiscovered, waiting quietly beneath the land she once fought so fiercely to defend. If the fate of Boudica reminds us that even history's most celebrated rebels can vanish without leaving a confirmed resting place, the next mystery follows another royal figure whose final moments were shaped not by open warfare alone, but by the quiet calculations of power. In the ancient world, political rivalries often survived long after battles had ended, and sometimes the last chapter was written far from the throne itself. The marble ruins of the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus stand beneath an open sky, their scattered columns hinting at a sanctuary that was once counted among the wonders of the ancient world. Pilgrims traveled great distances to reach this sacred place, believing it offered protection to those who sought refuge within its boundaries. Yet, even temples, revered for their holiness, could not always shield those caught in the ambitions of empires. It was here that Arsinoe IV, the younger sister of Cleopatra VII, spent the final years of her life. Born into the turbulent Ptolemaic dynasty, Arsinoe grew up in a royal household where family loyalty was often overshadowed by political survival. The descendants of Alexander the Great's generals ruled Egypt through a succession of alliances, rivalries, and struggles for power. Brothers challenged sisters. Sisters opposed brothers. In such an environment, royal blood offered privilege, but rarely security. Arsinoe first entered the historical record during the Alexandrian War between Cleopatra VII, her brother Ptolemy XIII, and Julius Caesar. Ancient writers describe how the young princess briefly emerged as a symbolic leader for forces resisting Caesar's intervention in Egypt. For a time, she represented an alternative claimant to the throne, standing in direct opposition to both Cleopatra and Rome's growing influence. The conflict ended in defeat. Arsinoe was captured and taken to Rome, where she appeared in Julius Caesar's triumphal procession. Such displays often ended in execution for defeated rulers, yet Arsinoe was spared. Ancient accounts suggest that public sympathy, perhaps stirred by her youth and royal status, persuaded Caesar to grant mercy. Instead of death, she was sent into exile at the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, where sanctuary offered a measure of protection from immediate political danger. For several years, she remained there. Then, after Caesar's assassination and the rise of new political alliances, circumstances changed once again. According to ancient sources, Cleopatra VII viewed Arsinoe as a continuing threat to her position. Even in exile, a surviving member of the Ptolemaic dynasty could become a rallying figure for future opposition. Around 41 BC, Mark Antony, acting at Cleopatra's request according to several ancient historians, ordered Arsinoe's execution. The decision shocked many observers. Executing a royal exile within or near a sacred sanctuary challenged deeply held traditions concerning places of refuge. Ancient writers portray the event as controversial, though their descriptions differ in detail. Some emphasize Antony's role. Others focus upon Cleopatra's influence. As with many episodes involving powerful historical figures, separating political reality from later literary interpretation remains difficult. The mystery does not end with her death. Centuries later, archaeologists working in Ephesus uncovered an octagonal monument believed by some to have been a royal tomb. During excavations in the early 20th century, skeletal remains were recovered from the structure. Decades afterward, researchers proposed that this remarkable tomb might belong to Arsinoe IV. The suggestion attracted worldwide attention. Its unusual architecture resembled certain Alexandrian influences, encouraging speculation that someone of exceptional status had been buried there. Yet the evidence proved far from conclusive. Much of the original skeletal material had been lost during the Second World War, making comprehensive modern analysis impossible. Questions surrounding the individual's age at death, biological profile, and even the tomb's original date continue to be debated. Today, many archaeologists remain cautious. While the monument is undeniably significant, no inscription identifies its occupant. Without definitive evidence, the connection to Arsinoe remains a compelling possibility rather than an established fact. Beyond the archaeological debate lie broader historical uncertainties. Did Cleopatra truly view her younger sister as an immediate political danger, or have later writers amplified their rivalry to strengthen the queen's dramatic reputation? Was Antony's decision driven primarily by political strategy rather than personal loyalty? Could contemporary accounts have simplified a far more complex chain of events unfolding across the Eastern Mediterranean? Some more speculative ideas suggest that the traditional narrative itself may be incomplete. A few researchers have wondered whether ancient reports merged separate individuals, or whether important records concerning Arsinoe's final years simply disappeared with the archives of Alexandria. Others imagine that overlooked inscriptions in Ephesus or elsewhere may one day clarify her final movements before her execution. For now, Arsinoe IV remains suspended between documented history and enduring uncertainty. Her life intersected with some of the ancient world's most influential figures, yet the final details of her story remain frustratingly incomplete. Somewhere beneath the ruins of Ephesus, within a forgotten inscription, or among records still waiting to be uncovered, another fragment of her life may yet survive, quietly preserving the truth behind one of the Ptolemaic dynasty's most haunting mysteries. If the mystery surrounding Arsinoe IV reminds us that even royal lives can fade into uncertainty despite appearing in the pages of history, the next mystery concerns a place rather than a person. Sometimes it is not a ruler who disappears, but the magnificent residence that once proclaimed that ruler's power to the world. The hills surrounding ancient Jerusalem rise in layers of pale limestone, their ridges catching the first light of dawn as they have for thousands of years. Olive trees cling to rocky slopes, narrow valleys weave through the landscape, and beneath the modern city rests an extraordinary archive of buried foundations. Every generation has built upon the remains of those before it, leaving a maze of forgotten walls hidden beneath streets, courtyards, and houses. Somewhere within these layers may lie one of the ancient world's most elusive royal residences, the palace of Herod the Great. Herod ruled Judea under Roman authority from 37 BC until his death around 4 BC. Remembered as both a brilliant builder and a deeply controversial ruler, he transformed the landscape with ambitious construction projects. Massive fortresses rose from desert cliffs. Artificial harbors reshaped the Mediterranean coast. The Second Temple in Jerusalem underwent an expansion so monumental that its scale astonished visitors from across the Roman world. Yet, the palace where Herod conducted the affairs of his kingdom remains surprisingly uncertain. Ancient historian Josephus provides the most detailed surviving description. He writes of an immense royal complex in Jerusalem, featuring luxurious halls, gardens, pools, towers, and richly decorated living quarters. According to his account, the palace rivaled the grandeur of Rome itself, combining military strength with extraordinary elegance. It served not only as a royal residence, but also as the political heart of Herod's administration. Despite these descriptions, no universally accepted identification has emerged. One leading theory places the palace near the western side of ancient Jerusalem, close to the impressive towers whose remains are traditionally associated with the area surrounding today's Tower of David. Excavations there have uncovered substantial walls, foundations, water systems, and architectural fragments dating to Herod's reign. Some archaeologists believe these remains formed part of the royal complex described by Josephus. Others urge greater caution. Jerusalem has experienced repeated destruction, rebuilding, earthquakes, warfare, and continuous occupation over more than 2 millennia. Each generation reused stone from earlier structures, altered foundations, and constructed new buildings atop older ones. Distinguishing one monumental complex from another is rarely straightforward. What appears to belong to a palace may later prove to be administrative buildings, defensive structures, or later additions built upon earlier remains. Archaeology has nevertheless revealed remarkable glimpses into Herod's architectural vision. Excavations throughout the region have uncovered his palaces at Jericho, Masada, Herodium, and Caesarea Maritima. These sites display a consistent style marked by Roman engineering, elaborate bathhouses, grand reception halls, decorative frescoes, sophisticated water systems, and carefully planned gardens. Together, they demonstrate the extraordinary scale of Herod's building program and provide valuable clues about what his Jerusalem palace may once have resembled. Yet, the principal royal residence described in ancient sources remains incomplete. Some researchers suggest that only portions of the palace have been uncovered, while critical sections still lie beneath densely occupied areas of modern Jerusalem, where large-scale excavation is difficult or impossible. Others believe later Roman construction following the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 fundamentally altered the original landscape, obscuring relationships between surviving structures and making reconstruction increasingly complex. The uncertainty has naturally encouraged more speculative ideas. Some propose that extensive underground chambers connected different parts of the palace, many of which remain inaccessible beneath later construction. Others wonder whether sealed rooms, hidden archives, or ceremonial spaces still survive below the city's foundations, preserved by centuries of accumulated debris. While no convincing evidence currently supports dramatic hidden complexes, archaeology has repeatedly shown that ancient cities often conceal remarkable surprises beneath familiar streets. Another intriguing possibility concerns the palace's political significance. If Herod's administrative headquarters has not yet been fully identified, what documents, inscriptions, or everyday objects might still remain within its buried remains? A simple clay seal, an overlooked inscription, or a forgotten storeroom could illuminate not only Herod's reign, but also the broader history of Roman Judea during one of its most influential periods. For now, the palace exists partly in stone and partly in historical memory. Josephus offers vivid descriptions, archaeology provides scattered fragments, and the modern city continues to guard much of its ancient past beneath layers of uninterrupted human occupation. Every excavation reveals another piece of Jerusalem's remarkable story, while reminding researchers how much remains concealed. Perhaps that is the enduring mystery of Herod's vanished palace. It was once the center of royal authority, diplomacy, and imperial ambition, welcoming rulers, governors, soldiers, and envoys whose decisions shaped the ancient Near East. Today, much of that world lies hidden beneath the footsteps of a living city. Somewhere below those familiar streets, another hall, another courtyard, or perhaps an entire forgotten wing may still rest in silence, waiting patiently for the moment when history uncovers it once again. If the vanished palace of Herod the Great reminds us that entire royal residences can disappear beneath the weight of centuries, the next mystery emerges not from beneath a city, but from the still waters of an ancient volcanic lake. Sometimes, history does not bury its secrets beneath stone. Sometimes it allows them to sink quietly beneath the surface, where they remain undisturbed for nearly 2,000 years. Lake Nemi lies peacefully among the wooded hills southeast of Rome. Surrounded by steep volcanic slopes, its calm waters often reflect the sky with almost perfect clarity. To modern visitors, it seems tranquil and self-contained, a place where little appears to have changed. Yet, for centuries, local legends spoke of enormous structures resting beneath its dark waters, objects too large to be ordinary boats, hidden below the surface where sunlight could never fully reach. The stories were not imagined. Ancient writers briefly referred to extravagant floating structures associated with the Roman Emperor Caligula, who ruled from AD 37 to AD 41. Known for his immense wealth, ambitious building projects, and controversial reputation, Caligula became one of Rome's most discussed emperors. Many accounts written after his death portray him as extravagant, unpredictable, and fascinated by displays of imperial grandeur. Yet, separating historical reality from political exaggeration has always presented a challenge. For centuries, the lake guarded its answer in silence. Occasional fishermen reported striking submerged timbers with their nets. Divers retrieved fragments of worked wood, bronze fittings, and carved ornaments from the lake bed, suggesting that something extraordinary rested below. Still, the true scale of the discovery remained unknown until the 20th century, when an ambitious engineering project temporarily drained much of Lake Nemi. What emerged astonished the archaeological world. Resting on the exposed lake floor were two enormous Roman ships, unlike anything previously discovered. Each measured more than 70 meters in length, making them among the largest vessels ever constructed during antiquity. Their craftsmanship revealed remarkable sophistication. Bronze decorations, marble flooring, mosaic surfaces, lead plumbing, rotating mechanisms, anchors of advanced design, and evidence of complex engineering suggested that these were not ordinary ships built for trade or warfare. They resembled floating palaces. The discoveries transformed understanding of Roman technology. Features once believed to belong to much later periods appeared to have existed centuries earlier. Bearings resembling ball-bearing mechanisms, elaborate piping systems, sophisticated anchors, and carefully engineered hulls demonstrated an impressive level of technical skill. Far from crude vessels, the ships represented masterpieces of ancient naval construction, yet their true purpose remains uncertain. One widely accepted interpretation suggests that the ships functioned as luxurious pleasure barges where Caligula entertained guests upon the secluded waters of Lake Nemi. The emperor's fascination with spectacle, combined with the extraordinary decorative features found aboard, appears consistent with this explanation. The lake itself also possessed religious significance, being associated with the nearby sanctuary of Diana, raising the possibility that ceremonial processions formed part of their use. Other researchers propose a more specialized role. Some believe one ship served primarily as a floating palace, while the second functioned as a ceremonial platform connected with religious observances. Architectural remains discovered aboard, including columns, decorative flooring, and structural arrangements resembling buildings more than ships, have encouraged the idea that these vessels were designed as permanent floating complexes rather than conventional craft intended for regular navigation. Then another mystery emerged. Shortly before the end of the Second World War in 1944, both ships were almost entirely destroyed by fire while housed in a museum near the lake. Exactly how the blaze began remains disputed. Some accounts attribute the destruction to retreating German forces. Others suggest artillery fire or accidental ignition during the fighting. Whatever the cause, one of archaeology's greatest discoveries was reduced largely to charred remains within a matter of hours. Fortunately, detailed photographs, measurements, drawings, and recovered artifacts preserved much of the scientific information gathered before the disaster. Even so, unanswered questions remain. Did the two known ships represent the entire fleet, or were additional vessels still resting beneath deeper sediments? Modern underwater surveys have identified scattered remains and isolated artifacts within Lake Nemi, but no discovery approaching the scale of the original ships has yet been confirmed. The possibility that further structures remain concealed beneath layers of mud continues to inspire careful investigation. Some more speculative ideas suggest that hidden sections of the ships, overlooked cargo, or ceremonial objects may still lie beyond the areas explored during earlier excavations. Others wonder whether future advances in underwater imaging could reveal features impossible to detect with previous technology, offering fresh insight into how these remarkable vessels were built and used. Perhaps that is why Caligula's giant ships continue to captivate historians and archaeologists alike. They remind us that extraordinary discoveries can emerge from places long thought familiar, challenging assumptions about ancient engineering, imperial ambition, and Roman craftsmanship. Somewhere beneath the quiet waters of Lake Nemi, beneath layers of volcanic sediment undisturbed by time, another forgotten fragment of this remarkable story may still be waiting, silent beneath the reflections, preserving secrets that the lake has guarded for nearly 2,000 years. If Caligula's giant ships remind us that remarkable achievements can vanish beneath still waters, the next mystery turns from submerged vessels to something even more fragile. Not marble, not bronze, and not timber, but words themselves. Across history, entire civilizations have disappeared through the loss of their libraries, leaving behind only faint echoes of ideas that may never be recovered. High above the Caicus Valley in what is now western Turkey, the ancient city of Pergamum rests upon a steep hill crowned by weathered stone. Broken columns rise against the horizon, theater seats cling dramatically to the hillside, and the ruins of temples overlook the plains below. Wind moves quietly through the remains of what was once one of the intellectual capitals of the ancient Mediterranean. Here, among palaces and sanctuaries, stood a library that rivaled the greatest collections of the ancient world. The Library of Pergamum was more than a repository of books. It represented a royal ambition to gather knowledge from across the known world. Established under the Attalid dynasty during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, it reportedly housed tens of thousands of scrolls. Ancient writers admired its scholars, its careful organization, and its dedication to literature, philosophy, medicine, history, and science. Its reputation became so great that later traditions claimed it stood second only to the famous Library of Alexandria. The story grows more intriguing when the surviving historical accounts begin to diverge. One well-known tradition, preserved by ancient writers, claims that Mark Antony presented the library's collection to Cleopatra VII as a gift, transferring hundreds of thousands of scrolls to Alexandria after fires had damaged its great library. The story has endured for centuries, appearing in histories, biographies, and popular imagination. Yet many modern historians approach this account with caution. The reported number of scrolls varies considerably among ancient sources, and contemporary evidence for such a massive transfer remains limited. Some researchers believe the account reflects later literary embellishment designed to emphasize Antony's devotion to Cleopatra rather than record a precise historical event. Others suggest that at least part of Pergamum's collection may indeed have been relocated, though perhaps on a much smaller scale than later writers imagined. Even if many scrolls left Pergamum, another question immediately follows. Did they all arrive? Libraries in the ancient world were not static collections. Scrolls were copied, borrowed, traded, damaged, replaced, and dispersed over generations. Political upheaval, warfare, earthquakes, accidental fires, changing rulers, and simple neglect all contributed to the gradual movement of manuscripts across the Mediterranean. By the Roman period, individual works from Pergamum may already have been scattered among private collections, temples, schools, and government archives. Archaeology has revealed impressive portions of Pergamum itself. Excavations have uncovered the city's acropolis, palaces, sanctuaries, theaters, water systems, and the architectural remains associated with the library complex. These discoveries confirm the city's remarkable cultural importance. Yet, buildings alone cannot reveal which texts once filled their shelves. The scrolls themselves are almost entirely absent. This absence has encouraged several possibilities. Some scholars believe the majority of Pergamum's manuscripts simply deteriorated over time. Papyrus and parchment require careful preservation, and countless ancient texts vanish through moisture, insects, mold, fire, and ordinary decay. Others suggest that many works survived indirectly because they were copied into later manuscripts, allowing the ideas to endure even after the original scrolls disappeared. But not every text was necessarily copied. How many works existed in a single unique copy? How many discoveries, philosophies, scientific observations, or historical records disappeared forever when their last manuscript perished? More speculative theories imagine that portions of the library escaped entirely. Some propose that private scholars removed valuable manuscripts before periods of conflict, storing them in villas, monasteries, or forgotten archives where they remain undiscovered. Others wonder whether sealed storerooms, collapsed chambers, or overlooked collections elsewhere in the eastern Mediterranean might still preserve fragments originating from Pergamum. While no evidence currently confirms such hidden repositories, remarkable manuscript discoveries, from the Dead Sea Scrolls to the Nag Hammadi Library, have repeatedly demonstrated that ancient texts can survive in unexpected places. There is also the intriguing possibility that unidentified fragments already resting in museum collections around the world may once have belonged to Pergamum's shelves. Without clear provenance, isolated pieces of parchment can remain disconnected from the larger story they once formed. Perhaps that is the deepest mystery surrounding the Library of Pergamum. Its buildings can be studied, its scholars remembered, and its influence traced through later civilizations, yet the voices preserved within its final scrolls have largely fallen silent. Somewhere inside an unopened tomb, a forgotten cave, a buried storeroom, or an overlooked archive, another manuscript may still survive. If one of those lost scrolls were discovered tomorrow, what forgotten chapter of the ancient world might suddenly speak again after more than 2,000 years of silence? If the lost final scrolls of the Library of Pergamum remind us that entire collections of knowledge can disappear, the next mystery centers on a single surviving manuscript. Sometimes one document escapes the silence of history, carrying remarkable information across the centuries while concealing the identity of the very person who created it. The waves of the Red Sea rise and fall beneath a relentless sun, their surface reflecting the same trade routes that connected Africa, Arabia, Egypt, and the Indian Ocean nearly 2,000 years ago. Merchant ships once crossed these waters with the seasonal monsoon winds, carrying spices, ivory, pearls, fine textiles, incense, glassware, and precious metals between distant civilizations. Every voyage depended upon experience, careful observation, and knowledge that could mean the difference between safe arrival and disaster. Among the surviving texts of the ancient world, few capture that maritime landscape more vividly than the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. Written during the 1st century AD, the work is neither a grand historical narrative nor a philosophical treatise. Instead, it reads like the practical observations of someone deeply familiar with long-distance trade. It describes ports, harbors, coastal landmarks, sailing seasons, commercial goods, local rulers, customs, and the challenges faced by merchants navigating the waters stretching from Roman Egypt to East Africa, Arabia, and the western shores of India. Its remarkable accuracy has repeatedly impressed historians. Many locations described in the manuscript have been identified through archaeology, while others correspond closely with ancient ports known from inscriptions, coins, and excavations. The text offers one of the clearest surviving windows into the commercial networks that linked the Roman world with regions far beyond its political borders. Through its careful descriptions, historians have reconstructed trade routes that shaped economies across thousands of miles. Yet, one fundamental question remains unanswered. Who wrote it? The manuscript offers no personal name. Unlike many ancient authors who identified themselves at the beginning or conclusion of their works, the creator of the Periplus remains anonymous. This silence has encouraged generations of investigation, because the text itself contains subtle clues about its author's background. The most widely accepted interpretation suggests that the writer was a Greek-speaking merchant from Roman Egypt, possibly based in Alexandria or another important Red Sea port such as Berenice or Myos Hormos. The practical tone, commercial detail, and first-hand familiarity with navigation suggest someone who participated directly in maritime trade rather than merely collecting information from others. Certain passages strengthen this impression. The author frequently comments upon the quality of goods available at different ports, discusses favorable trading opportunities, identifies seasonal sailing conditions, and distinguishes reliable markets from less profitable ones. Such observations resemble the experience of someone who had personally negotiated prices, loaded cargo, and spent years traveling between distant harbors. Yet certainty remains elusive. Some researchers argue that the text may represent a compilation assembled from multiple voyage reports rather than the observations of a single traveler. Others suggest that an experienced official involved in Roman customs administration could have possessed similarly detailed knowledge of commercial activity without personally sailing every route described. The manuscript itself survives only through much later copies, meaning the original version has long since disappeared. Every surviving manuscript passed through generations of scribes whose careful work preserved the text while leaving no additional information about its mysterious creator. As with many ancient writings, the author's identity may simply have been considered unnecessary by those who copied it. Archaeology continues to enrich the story. Excavations at ancient ports along the Red Sea have uncovered warehouses, amphorae, ship timbers, inscriptions, imported ceramics, cargo remains, and even peppercorns transported from India. These discoveries consistently confirm the extraordinary commercial world described in the Periplus. Rather than exaggerating distant lands, the anonymous writer appears to have documented a thriving international network whose scale modern archaeology has steadily revealed. More speculative possibilities occasionally emerge. Some have imagined that the author belonged to a wealthy merchant family whose private archives have yet to be discovered. Others wonder whether additional sections of the original work once existed, containing an introduction or conclusion that identified its creator before those pages were lost. There is also the possibility that overlooked papyrus fragments buried beneath the sands of Egypt may someday preserve another copy of the text, perhaps complete enough to answer the question that has endured for centuries. For now, the anonymous voice continues to guide readers across ancient seas without revealing its own origin. Every harbor described, every wind carefully noted, and every distant marketplace reflects the experience of someone who witnessed one of history's greatest trading networks firsthand. Somewhere inside an unopened archive, beneath desert sands, or hidden among uncatalogued manuscript fragments, another clue may still survive. If it does, the greatest discovery may not concern the routes described within the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, but the forgotten traveler whose remarkable observations quietly outlived empires while leaving only one mystery behind: his own name. If the anonymous author of the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea reminds us that history sometimes preserves a voice while losing the person behind it, the next mystery presents the opposite challenge. Here, the individual is known across centuries, yet the place where his earthly journey truly ended remains hidden beneath layers of tradition, devotion, and time. As dawn breaks over the rugged hills and river valleys of the ancient Near East, a quiet stillness settles across old monasteries, weathered shrines, and forgotten ruins. Candles flicker inside stone sanctuaries where pilgrims have gathered for generations, each believing they stand near a place touched by one of history's most revered figures. Yet, beneath the prayers and traditions lies a question that has never been fully answered. Where was John the Baptist truly laid to rest? John the Baptist occupies a unique place in history. Ancient sources portray him as a powerful preacher who lived in the wilderness, called for repentance, and baptized those who came seeking spiritual renewal. He appears not only in the New Testament, but also in the writings of the first-century Jewish historian Josephus, who describes John's influence among the people and records that he was imprisoned and executed by Herod Antipas. The broad outline of his life is supported by multiple independent traditions, making him one of the best attested religious figures of the first century. His death, however, marked the beginning of a much longer mystery. According to the Gospel accounts, John was imprisoned at the fortress of Machaerus, east of the Dead Sea. Following the request traditionally associated with the daughter of Herodias, He was beheaded by order of Herod Antipas. His disciples are said to have recovered his body and buried it, but the location of that burial is never identified with certainty. From that silence emerged centuries of tradition. One of the earliest and most enduring claims points toward Sebastia, in the central highlands of Palestine. By the 4th century A.D., Christian pilgrims were already visiting a tomb there believed to belong to John the Baptist. Churches were built over the site, and many early writers accepted the tradition as authentic. Archaeological remains confirm that the location became an important center of pilgrimage, although no direct evidence links the tomb itself to John's original burial. Another tradition developed much farther north. The Umayyad Mosque in Damascus has long been associated with the head of John the Baptist. According to local tradition, workers renovating the ancient structure discovered a revered relic believed to be his head, leading to the construction of a shrine within the mosque itself. Today, the site remains a place of deep respect for visitors from different religious backgrounds. Yet, historians note that traditions concerning relics often evolved gradually over centuries, making their earliest origins difficult to reconstruct. The mystery becomes even more complex when additional claims are considered. Across Europe and the Middle East, several churches and monasteries have at various times asserted possession of relics connected to John the Baptist. Some claim fragments of bone. Others preserve traditions regarding his right hand, believed by certain communities to have performed the act of baptism. Medieval pilgrimages, political alliances, and the movement of sacred relics across kingdoms contributed to a growing network of competing claims. Archaeology has occasionally added intriguing pieces to the puzzle. In 2010, excavations on St. Ivan Island, off the coast of present-day Bulgaria, uncovered a reliquary containing human bone fragments, accompanied by an inscription referring to John the Baptist. Scientific testing suggested the remains belonged to a man who lived during the 1st century A.D., fueling international interest. Even so, researchers emphasize that such evidence cannot establish identity with certainty. A 1st century date alone does not confirm that the bones belonged to John himself. Other scholars focus less on relics and more on historical geography. If John's disciples buried him quickly after his execution, perhaps his original grave lay near Machaerus, only later becoming the subject of competing traditions as Christianity expanded across different regions. Alternatively, his remains may have been moved during the early centuries, a practice not uncommon for individuals regarded as holy. More speculative theories suggest that additional relics remain hidden within forgotten monasteries, sealed crypts, or ancient churches that have yet to be fully explored. Others wonder whether undiscovered inscriptions or burial chambers beneath long-venerated pilgrimage sites could someday clarify which traditions preserve genuine historical memory and which emerged through centuries of devotion. For now, the true burial site of John the Baptist remains suspended between history, archaeology, and faith. The places associated with his memory continue to inspire reverence, while the historical evidence invites careful and thoughtful investigation. Somewhere beneath the foundations of an ancient sanctuary, within an overlooked inscription, or beneath layers of earth untouched for centuries, another fragment of the story may still endure, waiting quietly to reveal where one of history's most influential voices finally came to rest. If the search for the true burial site of John the Baptist reminds us that history often preserves memory while losing certainty, the next mystery shifts from sacred places to distant horizons. This time, the silence does not surround a single person or tomb, but an encounter that may have linked two of the greatest empires the ancient world had ever known. Across the vast deserts of Central Asia, ancient caravan routes stretch beyond the horizon like fading threads woven through mountains, valleys, and windswept plains. Long before paved roads or ocean-going empires connected continents, merchants guided camel caravans across these unforgiving landscapes, carrying silk, glass, spices, precious stones, lacquerware, and stories from lands few travelers would ever see. Every journey crossed countless frontiers, where languages changed, kingdoms rose and fell, and news traveled more slowly than the seasons. These routes would later become known collectively as the Silk Road. At opposite ends of this immense network stood two extraordinary civilizations. In the west, the Roman Empire extended across the Mediterranean, commanding vast territories through military strength, engineering, and commerce. Far to the east, the Han dynasty governed a sophisticated empire whose influence stretched across much of East Asia through administration, innovation, and expanding trade. Both possessed immense wealth. Both maintained powerful armies. Both believed themselves to stand at the center of the civilized world. Yet, one remarkable question remains. Did Rome and Han China ever truly meet face to face? Ancient Chinese records describe a distant Western empire known as Da Qin, a land portrayed as wealthy, orderly, and highly developed. Many historians identify Da Qin as the Roman Empire, based upon descriptions of geography, luxury goods, and political organization. At nearly the same time, Roman writers referred to the mysterious producers of silk, often called the Ceres, though their understanding of the distant East remained incomplete. Each civilization clearly knew that another great power existed beyond the deserts. But knowledge does not necessarily mean direct contact. Chinese historical works, including the Book of Han and the Book of Later Han, preserve fascinating accounts of diplomatic missions traveling westward. One of the most famous explorers, Zhang Qian, opened important connections across Central Asia during the 2nd century BC, laying the foundations for long-distance trade. Later records describe embassies, merchants, and reports concerning lands that stretched ever farther toward the western horizon. One particularly intriguing account appears in AD 166. Chinese sources record the arrival of an embassy said to represent the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. The visitors reportedly reached the Han court through southern maritime routes, presenting gifts that included ivory, rhinoceros horn, and tortoise shell. Yet many historians question whether these travelers truly represented the Roman government. Some suggest they were independent merchants who identified themselves in ways likely to impress local officials and secure favorable treatment. The Roman sources remain equally quiet. No surviving Roman document clearly describes an official embassy reaching the Han imperial court. Considering Rome's habit of recording diplomatic achievements, this silence has puzzled generations of historians. Was the encounter considered too minor to preserve? Were official reports lost? Or did the meeting never occur in the form later described by Chinese chroniclers? Archaeology has revealed compelling evidence of indirect connections. Roman glassware has been discovered in China. Chinese silk became highly prized throughout the Roman world, appearing in elite households despite repeated attempts by Roman authorities to discourage excessive imports. Coins, luxury goods, artistic influences, and traded materials demonstrate that products crossed Eurasia with remarkable success, passing through the hands of Parthian, Kushan, and other intermediary merchants. The goods traveled. Whether the governments themselves established sustained direct contact remains uncertain. Some historians believe intermediary empires intentionally limited communication between Rome and Han China. Acting as commercial middlemen, they benefited enormously from controlling trade and may have had little incentive to encourage direct diplomatic relationships that could bypass their influence. Others point toward the fragile nature of ancient archives. Imperial records were copied by hand onto bamboo slips, parchment, papyrus, or silk. Fires, warfare, floods, political upheaval, and simple decay have erased countless documents across both civilizations. It is entirely possible that reports of additional encounters once existed, but gradually disappeared over centuries of conflict and neglect. More speculative ideas imagine that forgotten diplomatic correspondence still lies buried within unexplored tombs, abandoned frontier forts, or sealed archives awaiting excavation. Others suggest that undiscovered shipwrecks along ancient maritime routes may preserve inscriptions or official cargo capable of illuminating journeys otherwise absent from written history. While such possibilities remain unproven, archaeology has repeatedly shown that seemingly insignificant discoveries can transform our understanding of the ancient world. For now, the silence between Rome and Han China remains one of history's most intriguing unanswered questions. Across thousands of miles, two remarkable civilizations exchanged goods, ideas, and distant impressions, yet the complete story of their relationship remains incomplete. Somewhere beneath desert sands, within an unopened tomb, or hidden among forgotten manuscripts still waiting to be translated, another record may survive, quietly preserving the moment when East and West came closer than history has ever fully remembered. If the missing records of Han Romanban contact remind us that knowledge can travel farther than the documents that describe it, the next mystery is contained within a single object. It is not a forgotten manuscript or a buried monument, but an ancient cup whose remarkable properties continue to challenge our understanding of Roman craftsmanship. Inside a quiet museum gallery, a delicate glass vessel rests behind protective glass, seemingly unremarkable at first glance. Its surface is carved into an intricate cage of vines and figures, depicting the mythical king Lycurgus, entangled by twisting branches as the god Dionysus triumphs over him. Soft green light reflects from its smooth curves. Yet, the moment a beam of light passes through the glass from behind, something extraordinary happens. The vessel transforms before the observer's eyes, shifting from deep green to a glowing crimson red. It feels almost impossible. This remarkable artifact is known as the Lycurgus cup, a Roman glass masterpiece believed to have been created during the 4th century AD. Barely larger than a modern drinking cup, it has become one of the most fascinating surviving objects from the ancient world, not because of its decoration alone, but because of the astonishing optical phenomenon hidden within its glass. Viewed in reflected light, the cup appears green. Viewed with light shining through it, the same glass becomes a rich, translucent red. For centuries, no one fully understood why. The cup passed through royal collections and private ownership before eventually attracting the attention of scientists as well as historians. Modern analysis revealed that the mystery was not the result of paint, dyes, or hidden layers of colored material. Instead, the secret lay deep within the glass itself. Embedded throughout the vessel are microscopic particles of gold and silver. These particles are extraordinarily small, far smaller than anything visible to the naked eye. Modern research has shown that their interaction with light causes different wavelengths to scatter and pass through the glass in distinct ways, producing the remarkable color change now known as dichroism. Depending upon how light enters the cup, entirely different colors emerge. The discovery immediately raised a profound question. How did Roman craftsmen achieve something so precise? One possibility suggests that the effect resulted from generations of highly skilled experimentation. Roman glassmakers were among the finest artisans of antiquity, producing elaborate vessels, mosaics, decorative windows, and luxury objects admired throughout the empire. Through careful refinement of raw materials and repeated observation, they may have discovered techniques whose scientific explanation would remain unknown for centuries. Yet, the degree of precision continues to surprise researchers. The metallic particles are distributed with remarkable consistency throughout the glass. Creating such an effect intentionally would have required exceptional control over temperature, material composition, and manufacturing techniques. Even with modern scientific understanding, reproducing the cup exactly remains a significant technical achievement. Some historians argue that the optical effect itself may have been accidental. Perhaps artisans experimenting with precious metals introduced tiny quantities into molten glass without fully understanding the physical principles involved. Once the extraordinary result appeared, skilled craftsmen may simply have repeated a successful recipe through experience rather than theoretical knowledge. Ancient artisans often mastered complex techniques through observation long before science could explain them. Archaeology offers additional clues. Other Roman glass objects displaying subtle dichroic properties have been identified, though none approach the dramatic transformation of the Lycurgus cup. This suggests the technology was not entirely unique, but exceedingly rare. Whether such objects represented luxury commissions for wealthy patrons or belonged to a broader artistic tradition that has largely disappeared remains uncertain. The original workshop has never been identified. No surviving written manual explains the manufacturing process. No Roman author describes the precise technique used to create such glass. The knowledge itself seems to have vanished, leaving behind only a handful of remarkable objects and many unanswered questions. More speculative ideas occasionally emerge. Some wonder whether the cup represents the surviving example of a lost school of Roman glassmaking, whose greatest achievements simply failed to endure. Others suggest that additional masterpieces may still rest undiscovered within buried villas, shipwrecks, or forgotten tombs, awaiting excavation. There are even those who imagine that ancient craftsmen possessed practical manufacturing traditions far more sophisticated than surviving evidence currently reveals, not through mysterious powers, but through generations of accumulated expertise eventually lost with the collapse of workshops and trade networks. Whatever the explanation, the Lycurgus cup continues to blur the boundary between art and technology. It reminds us that the ancient world was often more inventive than modern assumptions allow, preserving achievements whose methods disappeared long before historians could record them. Somewhere beneath the ruins of a Roman workshop, inside an unopened cargo from a forgotten shipwreck, or among fragments of glass yet to be carefully examined, another clue may still exist, waiting quietly to reveal whether the cup was an isolated masterpiece or the final survivor of a remarkable technology almost entirely erased by time. If the Lycurgus cup reminds us that extraordinary craftsmanship can survive while the knowledge behind it disappears, the next mystery concerns something even more elusive. Not a forgotten technique preserved inside a single object, but an immense collection of sacred treasures that once stood at the heart of an entire civilization before vanishing into the uncertainty of history. The first rays of morning spread across the limestone hills of Jerusalem, revealing walls built and rebuilt across thousands of years. Beneath the modern city lie countless layers of forgotten streets, collapsed buildings, hidden tunnels, and buried foundations, each preserving fragments of civilizations that rose, flourished, and disappeared. Few places on Earth have witnessed so many triumphs, tragedies, and transformations. Yet, among all the mysteries hidden beneath these ancient stones, one continues to inspire more questions than almost any other. What became of the treasures of the Second Temple? For centuries, the Second Temple stood as the spiritual center of Jewish life. Rebuilt after the Babylonian exile and later expanded on an extraordinary scale by Herod the Great, the sanctuary became one of the most magnificent religious structures of the ancient world. Ancient writers describe vast courtyards, towering colonnades, gleaming white stone, and brilliant golden ornamentation visible from miles away. Pilgrims traveled from across the Mediterranean and beyond, bringing offerings, gifts, and sacred objects that accumulated over generations. The temple was far more than a place of worship. It also served as a treasury. Within its chambers were ceremonial vessels, finely crafted furnishings, sacred garments, precious metals, and donations entrusted by generations of worshippers. Among the most revered objects described in ancient sources was the great seven-branched menorah fashioned from gold. Alongside it stood the table of the bread of the presence, silver trumpets, incense utensils, and numerous ritual implements whose symbolic importance reached far beyond their material value. Then, in AD 70, everything changed. Following years of rebellion, Roman forces under the future Emperor Titus laid siege to Jerusalem. Ancient historian Josephus provides a detailed account of the city's destruction, describing famine, fierce fighting, and eventually the burning of the temple itself. The sanctuary that had stood for centuries was reduced to ruins, leaving a profound mark upon history and religious tradition. Yet, before the flames consumed the complex, Roman soldiers seized many of its treasures. One remarkable piece of evidence survives to this day. Carved into the Arch of Titus in Rome is a procession showing Roman soldiers carrying sacred objects captured during the conquest of Jerusalem. The relief prominently depicts the Great Menorah, accompanied by other temple furnishings. Unlike many historical mysteries that rely solely upon written accounts, this monument offers visual testimony created within decades of the events themselves. For a brief moment, the treasures seem to reappear. Then they vanish once more. Historical sources indicate that the spoils were transported to Rome and displayed during Titus's triumph before being housed within the Temple of Peace, one of the capital's grand public monuments. There, according to Roman tradition, the captured objects symbolized imperial victory over Judea. After that, the trail becomes unexpectedly uncertain. One possibility suggests that many of the treasures remained safely in Rome until AD 410, when the Visigoths under Alaric entered and plundered the city. Another wave of uncertainty followed in AD 455, when the Vandals captured Rome and reportedly carried enormous quantities of treasure to Carthage in North Africa. If the temple treasures still survived by then, they may have joined that vast movement of wealth across the Mediterranean. Yet, even this explanation raises further questions. By the 6th century AD, the Byzantine historian Procopius recorded that General Belisarius recovered valuable treasures after defeating the Vandals. According to his account, sacred objects taken from Jerusalem eventually reached Constantinople, before being sent away once more because they were believed to bring misfortune to those who possessed them. Some versions of the tradition suggest they were returned to Jerusalem or another location in the eastern provinces of the empire. No surviving inventory confirms exactly which objects were involved. The uncertainty has encouraged generations of investigation. Archaeologists have excavated extensively in Rome, uncovering imperial forums, temples, warehouses, and public buildings connected with the ancient capital. Yet no confirmed temple treasures have emerged. Likewise, centuries of excavation throughout Jerusalem have revealed extraordinary remains from the Second Temple period, including streets, ritual baths, monumental stairways, inscriptions, coins, and architectural fragments, but none of the principal sacred treasures themselves. The copper scroll discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls has added another intriguing dimension to the mystery. Unlike the other manuscripts found near Qumran, it appears to list numerous hidden caches of gold, silver, and sacred objects concealed at various locations. Some researchers have wondered whether at least part of this inventory might relate to temple wealth hidden before Jerusalem fell to Rome. Others argue that the document refers to entirely different treasures or perhaps represents an idealized inventory rather than an actual map. Without confirmed discoveries, the connection remains uncertain. The temple treasures have also become the focus of numerous traditions extending far beyond the historical record. Some legends claim that priests secretly removed the most sacred objects before the Roman army entered the temple precincts, concealing them within hidden tunnels beneath Jerusalem. Others suggest they were transported eastward to remote monasteries or fortified settlements where they remained protected through centuries of political upheaval. There are stories placing the menorah beneath ancient ruins, inside sealed caves overlooking the Dead Sea, or concealed within forgotten chambers beneath the city itself. These traditions have endured for centuries, yet none has been supported by conclusive archaeological evidence. Modern technology continues to reshape the search. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, digital mapping, and non-invasive archaeological methods have revealed hidden structures beneath ancient landscapes that earlier generations could never have detected. Each new survey uncovers forgotten streets, buried buildings, and previously unknown chambers. Even so, the areas surrounding the ancient temple remain among the most archaeologically sensitive locations in the world, where extensive excavation is limited by historical, religious, and political realities. Some researchers therefore believe the greatest discoveries may lie not beneath open excavation sites, but within overlooked archives. Roman administrative documents, private letters, forgotten monastery inventories, or neglected museum collections could one day contain clues capable of reshaping the investigation. Throughout history, important artifacts have occasionally remained unidentified simply because their true significance was not recognized. More speculative theories venture even further. Some imagine that at least one of the sacred objects never left Jerusalem at all, hidden by those determined to preserve it from Roman capture. Others suggest that fragments of temple treasure may already exist in scattered collections, separated from their original context through centuries of trade, conquest, and inheritance. While such ideas remain unverified, they reflect the enduring fascination inspired by objects that disappeared at one of history's defining moments. Perhaps that is why the lost treasure of the Second Temple continues to occupy such a unique place among the world's greatest historical mysteries. These were not merely valuable artifacts. They were symbols of faith, identity, craftsmanship, and memory, carried through triumph, catastrophe, conquest, and legend. Somewhere beneath forgotten foundations, within an unopened storeroom, inside an overlooked archive, or resting in a place no historian has yet imagined, another piece of that remarkable story may still survive, waiting quietly beneath the weight of centuries for the moment when history finally uncovers what time chose to conceal. If the lost treasures of the Second Temple remind us that sacred objects can vanish amid the collapse of kingdoms, the next mystery follows a different kind of relic. These were not symbols of worship, but emblems of military honor. To lose them was more than a battlefield defeat. It was a wound to the pride of an empire that believed itself destined to rule the known world. Morning mist drifts silently through the forests of northern Germany, wrapping towering oaks and narrow woodland paths in a pale veil. Damp leaves soften every footstep, while patches of marshland disappear beneath thick grass and shallow pools of water. Even today, the landscape feels disorienting. Dense woodland limits visibility to only a few meters, and the quiet seems almost unnatural, interrupted only by distant birds and the whisper of wind through the trees. It is easy to imagine how thousands of soldiers could become separated here, their carefully ordered formations dissolving into confusion beneath endless branches. Somewhere within forests like these, one of Rome's greatest military disasters unfolded. In AD 9, 3 Roman legions, 17, 18, and 19, marched under the command of Publius Quinctilius Varus into territory Rome believed it had largely subdued. Accompanying them were auxiliary troops, cavalry, civilians, servants, merchants, and supply wagons, forming a moving column that may have stretched for many kilometers. The Roman Empire had every reason to feel confident. For decades, Roman armies had expanded steadily across Europe, defeating powerful kingdoms and incorporating vast territories into imperial rule. Roads, forts, taxation, and administration followed military conquest. Germania appeared to be the empire's next frontier. But appearances can deceive. Among Varus's trusted advisors was Arminius, a Germanic noble who had received Roman military training and even held Roman citizenship. To Roman commanders, he seemed a loyal ally familiar with the local tribes and landscape. In reality, according to the ancient historians Tacitus, Velleius Paterculus, and Cassius Dio, Arminius had secretly united several Germanic groups into a coordinated resistance. His knowledge of Roman strategy became one of Rome's greatest vulnerabilities. As the army advanced through difficult terrain, Arminius persuaded Varus to alter his route in response to reports of unrest. The decision drew the massive column into forests and marshes, where organized formations became increasingly difficult to maintain. Then the attacks began. For several days, Germanic warriors launched repeated assaults from concealed positions. Trees, rain, mud, and narrow pathways prevented the Romans from deploying their usual battlefield tactics. Heavy equipment became a burden. Wagons bogged down. Communication broke apart. One legion after another was overwhelmed. Ancient sources describe scenes of extraordinary chaos. Defensive camps were hastily constructed only to be abandoned. Officers struggled to regroup scattered units. Horses panicked. Weapons became difficult to use in thick woodland. Exhausted soldiers fought in conditions entirely different from the open battlefields where Roman discipline normally prevailed. By the battle's end, the three legions had ceased to exist. Varus, realizing defeat was unavoidable, reportedly took his own life rather than face capture. The consequences reached far beyond the battlefield. The disaster shocked Rome. Emperor Augustus is famously said by the Roman historian Suetonius to have cried, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." Whether the quotation is perfectly accurate or somewhat embellished by later writers, it reflects the profound psychological impact the defeat had upon the empire. Even more significant was what disappeared alongside the soldiers. Every Roman legion carried an aquila, a golden eagle mounted upon a staff. These eagles were not ordinary military standards. They represented the spirit, honor, and identity of each legion. Soldiers swore oaths before them. They were guarded by specially chosen standard-bearers known as aquilifers, who defended them with their lives. Losing an eagle was among the greatest disgraces imaginable for a Roman army. When legions 17, 18, and 19 vanished, so did their eagles. Unlike the legions themselves, whose destruction is well documented, the ultimate fate of all three standards remains far less certain. Ancient historians record that Germanic warriors captured the eagles during or immediately after the battle. Yet, what happened afterward becomes increasingly difficult to trace. Rome did not simply accept their loss. Years later, Germanicus, the adopted son of Emperor Tiberius, led several military campaigns deep into Germania between AD 14 and AD 16. His objectives extended beyond military retaliation. Recovering the lost standards became a matter of enormous symbolic importance. According to Tacitus, one eagle was recovered from the Bructeri tribe. Another was reportedly retrieved from the Marsi. The third, ancient writers suggest, was eventually recovered during the reign of Emperor Claudius from the Chauci, or another Germanic group, although surviving accounts differ regarding the precise circumstances. At first glance, the mystery appears solved, But archaeology introduces new questions. No recovered eagle has survived into modern times. Everything historians know about their recovery comes from literary sources written decades after the events. No physical standard has ever been conclusively identified. No inscription confirms the exact locations where they were hidden. No archaeological discovery has revealed the ceremonies through which they were returned to Rome. Even the battlefield itself remained uncertain for centuries. For generations, scholars debated where the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest actually occurred. Various locations were proposed across northwestern Germany until large-scale excavations at Calcresi uncovered compelling evidence beginning in the late 20th century. Thousands of artifacts emerged from the soil: Roman coins dating to the reign of Augustus, fragments of armor, spearheads, cavalry equipment, sling bullets, animal bones, tools, and human remains all pointed toward a catastrophic military confrontation. A long earthen rampart appeared to match descriptions of Germanic defensive positions from the ancient accounts. Most archaeologists now consider Calcresi the strongest candidate for at least part of the battlefield. Yet even here, important questions remain. The conflict likely unfolded across a wide area over several days rather than at one single location. If so, countless artifacts, including perhaps ceremonial objects, may remain scattered throughout forests, wetlands, and agricultural land extending far beyond currently excavated sites. The eagles themselves have never been found. This absence has encouraged several interpretations. One possibility is that the standards recovered by Germanicus and later commanders were indeed returned to Rome, where they were eventually melted down, recycled, or lost during subsequent centuries of political upheaval. Gold and precious metals were rarely left unused during periods of crisis. Another explanation suggests that not every recovered object was genuine. Could Germanic tribes have created ceremonial replicas while concealing the originals elsewhere? Historians generally regard this as unlikely, but the symbolic importance attached to the eagles has encouraged occasional speculation. Some researchers wonder whether one or more standards may never have been recovered at all. Ancient writers often composed histories celebrating Roman resilience and imperial authority. Successfully recovering all three eagles created a powerful narrative of redemption following catastrophic defeat. While most historians accept the traditional accounts, the possibility remains that surviving records simplified a far more complicated reality. The forests themselves continue to preserve remarkable secrets. Modern archaeological methods have transformed understanding of the battlefield. Metal detectors, aerial surveys, LiDAR scanning, soil analysis, and careful excavation have revealed features invisible only decades ago. Every new investigation uncovers additional fragments of Roman equipment, demonstrating that the landscape still holds countless undiscovered traces of the battle. What else remains buried beneath centuries of accumulated earth? A standard-bearing pole reduced to mineral traces, decorative fittings overlooked during earlier excavations, fragments of ceremonial bronze buried beneath marsh sediments where oxygen slowed decay. Each possibility reminds archaeologists that ancient battlefields rarely surrender all their evidence at once. More speculative theories venture further still. Some imagine that retreating aquilifers, recognizing defeat was inevitable, deliberately buried the eagles before their capture, hoping future Roman expeditions would recover them. Others suggest victorious Germanic warriors may have deposited the standards in sacred bogs or ritual sites as offerings to their gods, following practices documented elsewhere in northern Europe. Wetland deposits have preserved remarkable Iron Age artifacts, including weapons, shields, and ceremonial objects, making such ideas archaeologically conceivable, although no evidence currently connects them to the missing Roman standards. Another intriguing possibility concerns forgotten collections assembled long after the battle. Throughout antiquity, valuable metal objects were frequently reused, hidden during invasions, or incorporated into later treasures whose original identities gradually disappeared. Could fragments of one eagle survive unnoticed within another artifact, stripped of the historical context that once gave it meaning? If the disappearance of the eagles of Legion 17, 18, and 19 reminds us that even the greatest empires can lose the symbols of their power, the next mystery shifts from battlefields to bustling ports, crowded marketplaces, and imperial courts. This time, the missing piece is not a sacred treasure or a military standard, but the true identity of a man whose wealth, influence, and connections reached across the Mediterranean, yet whose official role remains surprisingly uncertain. The harbor of Alexandria awakens long before sunrise. Merchant ships rock gently against stone quays as sailors prepare for another voyage across the Mediterranean. The scent of salt water mixes with spices unloaded from Arabia, ivory carried from Africa, silk that has crossed Asia through countless intermediaries, and grain destined for Rome. Voices speaking Greek, Egyptian, Latin, Aramaic, and many other languages blend into a constant rhythm of commerce. Warehouses stretch toward the horizon, their storerooms overflowing with goods gathered from nearly every corner of the known world. Few cities in antiquity rivaled Alexandria. Founded by Alexander the Great and later transformed into the capital of Ptolemaic Egypt, before becoming one of Rome's greatest provincial cities, Alexandria stood at the crossroads of civilizations. It was a place where philosophers debated beside merchants, where scholars studied ancient manuscripts while tax officials recorded incoming cargo, and where immense fortunes could be built through international trade. Within this extraordinary city lived one of antiquity's most enigmatic figures. His name was Alexander. History usually remembers him as Alexander the Alabarch, yet even that title presents the first mystery. Ancient sources identify Alexander as an immensely wealthy Jewish official living during the 1st century AD. He belonged to one of Alexandria's most influential families. His brother was the renowned philosopher Philo of Alexandria, whose writings blended Jewish theology with Greek philosophy and survive in remarkable detail. Through Philo's works and the writings of the Jewish historian Josephus, Alexander briefly emerges from the shadows of history. Then the uncertainties begin. The title Alabarch appears only rarely in surviving literature. What exactly did it mean? For centuries, historians have debated its meaning without reaching complete agreement. One interpretation suggests that Alabarch referred to a senior customs official responsible for collecting duties on goods entering and leaving Alexandria. Considering the city's enormous commercial importance, such a position would have carried immense authority and financial influence. Every shipment of grain, luxury textiles, spices, metals, timber, and imported merchandise would have passed under the supervision of officials responsible for taxation. If Alexander occupied such a role, his extraordinary wealth becomes easier to understand. Another theory proposes a different explanation. Some scholars argue that the title derives not from a customs office, but from responsibility over a specific administrative district. Others believe Alabarch may represent a later corruption of another official designation entirely, copied imperfectly by generations of scribes preserving ancient manuscripts. Because relatively few inscriptions mention the title, certainty remains frustratingly elusive. The mystery deepens when Alexander's personal influence is considered. Josephus records that Alexander maintained close relationships with members of the Roman imperial family. His son, Tiberius Julius Alexander, would later become an important Roman military commander and provincial governor, eventually playing a significant role during the chaotic civil wars following Emperor Nero's death. Alexander himself reportedly lent enormous sums of money to powerful individuals. One of the most remarkable accounts concerns Herod Agrippa I, the future king of Judea. According to Josephus, Agrippa faced severe financial difficulties before eventually rising to royal authority. Alexander is said to have provided him with substantial financial assistance, though not without conditions. The story reveals a man whose wealth extended far beyond ordinary commerce. He appears almost as a banker to kings. Yet, official Roman records concerning his position remain remarkably scarce. Philo also offers valuable glimpses into Alexander's family. His nephew, Marcus Julius Alexander, married Berenice, daughter of Herod Agrippa I. These marriages connected Alexander's household to some of the most influential political and royal families of the Eastern Mediterranean. Such relationships suggest that his status extended well beyond local administration. How did one family accumulate such extraordinary influence? Trade undoubtedly played an important role. Alexandria controlled the grain supply upon which Rome increasingly depended. It also functioned as the western gateway for luxury goods arriving from Arabia, East Africa, and India. Merchants handling these enormous commercial networks could achieve astonishing prosperity. Still, wealth alone rarely secured lasting political influence. Some historians believe Alexander operated something resembling an international commercial empire, combining shipping, finance, customs administration, and investment. Others argue that his position has occasionally been exaggerated because surviving sources focus disproportionately upon elite individuals whose activities naturally generated historical attention. Archaeology paints an increasingly vivid picture of Alexandria during Alexander's lifetime. Excavations have uncovered warehouses, harbor installations, shipwrecks, inscriptions, imported ceramics, monumental buildings, and commercial districts reflecting the city's astonishing prosperity. Underwater archaeology has revealed submerged portions of the ancient harbor, where earthquakes and changing coastlines concealed parts of Roman Alexandria beneath the sea. Yet, none of these discoveries has answered the central question: who exactly was Alexander the Alabarch? No surviving official appointment confirms his office. No inscription definitively explains his title. No personal archive detailing his commercial activities has ever been discovered. This absence has encouraged careful historical reconstruction. Some researchers suggest that Alexander served as chief customs administrator responsible for taxing Red Sea commerce entering Roman Egypt. Such a position would have made him one of the empire's most strategically important financial officials, overseeing revenues generated by international trade stretching from India to Rome. Others remain unconvinced. They argue that the evidence connecting the title Alabarch to customs administration relies heavily upon later interpretation rather than direct contemporary documentation. According to this view, Alexander may instead have served as leader of Alexandria's influential Jewish community in an administrative capacity now poorly understood. There is also uncertainty regarding his relationship with Roman authorities. His family appears remarkably well integrated into imperial society. Several members adopted Roman names. Political alliances crossed cultural boundaries. Yet Philo simultaneously describes periods of severe tension experienced by Alexandria's Jewish population, particularly during the disturbances of AD 38. Where did Alexander stand amid these conflicts? Did his wealth provide protection unavailable to ordinary citizens? Or did his influence require careful negotiation between competing political interests? The surviving sources remain frustratingly brief. Perhaps the greatest challenge facing historians is the uneven nature of the evidence itself. Philo naturally focused upon philosophical and religious concerns. Josephus concentrated primarily upon Jewish history and relations with Rome. Roman administrative records from Alexandria survive only in scattered fragments. Together, they illuminate portions of Alexander's life while leaving enormous gaps between them. More speculative possibilities occasionally emerge from these silences. Some historians have wondered whether Alexander's business network extended much farther east than surviving sources explicitly state, reaching merchant communities connected through the Red Sea and Indian Ocean trade. If so, his influence may have stretched across commercial systems rivaling those of modern multinational enterprises. Others imagine that Alexandria's still-buried administrative districts may preserve overlooked inscriptions naming officials whose titles could finally explain the meaning of Alabarch. The city has endured earthquakes, tsunamis, fires, warfare, and continuous rebuilding over 2 millennia. Entire neighborhoods remain inaccessible beneath the modern metropolis or submerged beneath the Mediterranean. Ancient papyrus archives offer another intriguing possibility. Egypt's dry climate has preserved countless documents ranging from tax receipts and personal letters to government decrees. Every archaeological season produces additional fragments requiring careful conservation and translation. Among thousands of unpublished papyri stored in museums around the world, there may already exist references to Alexander awaiting recognition. Some scholars have even proposed that Alabarch was never an official title at all, but an informal designation reflecting commercial prestige rather than government office. If true, generations of historians may have searched for an administrative position that never formally existed. While this idea remains speculative, it illustrates how easily ancient terminology can shift in meaning across centuries of copying and translation. The mystery also reflects something broader about the ancient world. History often preserves emperors, generals, and conquerors in extraordinary detail. Merchants, financiers, and administrators, even those whose decisions shaped economies spanning continents, frequently disappear into fragments of correspondence and scattered references. Alexander seems to exist precisely at that boundary. He was influential enough to appear beside kings and governors, wealthy enough to finance royal ambitions, connected enough to influence imperial politics, yet elusive enough that historians still debate the very office he held. Perhaps this uncertainty explains why Alexander the Alabarch continues to fascinate researchers. He represents an ancient Mediterranean world far more interconnected than earlier generations once imagined. A world where commerce linked distant cultures, where religious communities negotiated imperial politics, and where individual fortunes could rival those of royalty itself. Today, beneath the crowded streets of modern Alexandria and the calm waters covering portions of its ancient harbor, countless archives remain buried. Warehouse foundations, administrative buildings, forgotten offices, broken seals, shipping records, inscriptions, and unopened papyrus bundles may still preserve details of lives that history recorded only in passing. Somewhere among those silent remnants may rest the missing clue capable of revealing who Alexander the Alabarch truly was, not merely a wealthy man mentioned by ancient writers, but one of the most influential figures in the commercial heart of the Roman world, whose identity has remained just beyond the reach of certainty for nearly 2,000 years. Additional English paragraph, 600+ words. The mystery of Alexander the Alabarch extends far beyond the question of a single title. It opens an extraordinary window into the economic, political, and cultural complexity of the Roman Empire during the 1st century AD. Modern historians increasingly recognize that individuals like Alexander exercised influence in ways that are often difficult to trace because ancient historical narratives tended to celebrate emperors, military victories, and political revolutions rather than the financial networks that quietly sustained imperial power. Commerce was the lifeblood of Rome, and Alexandria stood at the very center of that system. Every year, enormous fleets transported Egyptian grain across the Mediterranean to feed the growing population of Rome, while luxury goods arriving from India, Arabia, Nubia, and East Africa passed through Alexandria before reaching elite markets throughout the empire. Anyone occupying a senior administrative or commercial position within this immense trading hub would have commanded extraordinary authority. Whether Alexander officially supervised customs duties, managed commercial enterprises, or fulfilled another administrative function altogether, his remarkable wealth suggests participation in economic systems operating on a scale that rivaled many royal treasuries. His life also illustrates the remarkable diversity of the Roman world, where people from different ethnic, linguistic, and religious backgrounds interacted daily in one of antiquity's greatest cosmopolitan cities. Greek philosophers, Egyptian priests, Roman officials, Jewish scholars, Syrian merchants, African traders, and sailors from distant ports all contributed to Alexandria's unique identity. Within such an environment, influence depended not only upon wealth, but also upon diplomacy, education, multilingual communication, and the ability to navigate complex political relationships. Alexander's family appears to have mastered these skills exceptionally well. Through marriage alliances, financial connections, and close relationships with influential Roman leaders, they occupied a unique position bridging several communities simultaneously. His brother Philo became one of antiquity's greatest philosophers, while his descendants entered the highest levels of Roman administration, demonstrating that the family's influence extended across multiple generations. Such achievements invite broader questions regarding the role of elite provincial families within the empire. Rome depended heavily upon capable local leaders who understood regional economies, maintained political stability, and facilitated communication between imperial authorities and local populations. Figures like Alexander may therefore have served as indispensable intermediaries, whose importance exceeded the limited attention they received from surviving historians. Archaeological discoveries continue to strengthen this perspective. Excavations throughout Egypt have revealed an astonishing volume of commercial documents, including contracts, tax receipts, shipping manifests, warehouse inventories, banking records, and private correspondence. Together, these documents portray an economy far more sophisticated than earlier historians once imagined. Credit systems, maritime insurance, long-distance partnerships, and complex financial agreements allowed merchants to move enormous quantities of goods across thousands of kilometers, despite the limitations of ancient transportation. If Alexander participated in these commercial networks, his influence may have extended well beyond Alexandria itself, reaching ports throughout the Mediterranean and perhaps even trading communities connected to the Indian Ocean. Some scholars compare these ancient networks to early multinational business operations, relying upon trusted agents, family relationships, and carefully maintained reputations to conduct transactions across great distances. Such comparisons help explain how one individual could acquire both immense wealth and political influence without holding the highest imperial offices. The uncertainty surrounding Alexander's exact position also highlights the limitations of historical evidence. Surviving texts represent only a tiny fraction of the documents once produced throughout the Roman Empire. Countless administrative records were written on papyrus, a material highly vulnerable to moisture except in Egypt's exceptionally dry climate. Even there, only a small percentage has survived. Thousands of unpublished papyrus fragments remain in museum collections awaiting conservation, cataloging, and translation. It is entirely possible that future research will uncover a contract, tax register, official decree, or personal letter mentioning Alexander in greater detail than any source currently known. If the identity of Alexander the Egyptian, Alabarch, reminds us that a single life can fade into uncertainty despite its influence upon history, the next mystery concerns something even more fragile than memory. It is not the disappearance of a person, but the gradual silence of an entire historical masterpiece. Thousands of pages once existed. Today, most have vanished, leaving only fragments of one of Rome's greatest chronicles. In the quiet reading room of an ancient library, rows of carefully copied parchment manuscripts once rested upon wooden shelves. Lamps cast a warm glow across inked pages, while the soft sound of scribes turning leaves echoed through the halls. Every manuscript represented years of careful labor. Every line carried voices from earlier generations. Yet, libraries have always shared one silent enemy: time. Fire, moisture, insects, neglect, war, and the simple wearing away of fragile materials have erased more books than history can ever count. Among those losses, few are as profound as the missing books of Livy. Titus Livius, known simply as Livy, was born in Padua around 59 BC during one of the most turbulent periods of Roman history. Civil wars reshaped the Republic. Powerful generals competed for authority, and the political order that had governed Rome for centuries slowly gave way to imperial rule under Augustus. Livy witnessed these transformations firsthand, but instead of pursuing a military or political career, he dedicated himself to recording the story of Rome itself. The result was monumental. His great work, traditionally known as Ab Urbe Condita, or From the Founding of the City, originally consisted of 142 books. Beginning with Rome's legendary foundation by Romulus and Remus, Livy traced the rise of the Republic, its wars, political struggles, heroes, disasters, and triumphs across nearly 7 centuries of history. No comparable historical project from ancient Rome approached its scale. Livy's work became one of the defining literary achievements of classical civilization. Ancient readers admired both his elegant writing and his ability to transform historical events into vivid narratives filled with dramatic speeches, moral lessons, and memorable characters. While modern historians recognize that some speeches were literary reconstructions rather than verbatim records, Livy's influence upon later historical writing proved immense. Yet, today, only 35 of the original 142 books survive in complete form. Books 1 through 10 remain largely intact, covering Rome's legendary beginnings and early republic. Books 21 through 45 also survive, preserving detailed accounts of the Second Punic War against Hannibal and Rome's growing dominance throughout the Mediterranean. Everything else has disappeared. More than 100 books are gone. The scale of the loss is difficult to comprehend. Entire generations of Roman history, once described in careful detail, now survive only through brief summaries known as the Perioci, quotations preserved by later authors, scattered references, and occasional fragments copied into unrelated manuscripts. The missing books once described some of the most significant periods in Roman history. They almost certainly included fuller accounts of the social war, the dictatorship of Sulla, the rise of Pompey, Julius Caesar's expansion into Gaul, the civil wars, the assassination of Caesar, and the emergence of Augustus as Rome's first emperor. While other ancient historians discuss many of these events, Livy's perspective has largely vanished. Why? The answer appears surprisingly ordinary. Ancient books rarely disappeared through a single dramatic catastrophe. Instead, they gradually faded through centuries of copying. Every manuscript had to be reproduced by hand. When monasteries, libraries, or scholars chose which texts deserved another copy, practical decisions often determined survival. Frequently requested books were copied repeatedly. Less popular volumes slowly deteriorated until no complete manuscripts remained. Livy's enormous work presented an unusual problem. Copying all 142 books required enormous amounts of parchment, ink, labor, and time. Scribes naturally divided the history into smaller sections. If even one portion failed to receive new copies, that section gradually vanished while others survived. By the Middle Ages, this process had already transformed the manuscript tradition. Some books remained common, others became exceptionally rare. Eventually, entire sections disappeared altogether. Archaeology has occasionally offered remarkable reminders. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79 preserved hundreds of carbonized papyrus scrolls within the villa of the papyri at Herculaneum. For centuries, these fragile rolls appeared impossible to read. Today, advanced imaging technologies allow researchers to identify hidden writing without physically unrolling many of the damaged manuscripts. Although no confirmed books of Livy have yet emerged from Herculaneum, the discovery demonstrates that ancient libraries can survive in unexpected ways. Egypt offers another source of hope. The country's dry climate has preserved thousands of papyrus fragments discarded in rubbish heaps, abandoned settlements, and forgotten archives. Tiny scraps of ancient texts continue to be identified every year. Sometimes only a few lines survive, yet even those fragments can reshape scholarly understanding. Several small pieces of Livy's lost books have already been identified among such discoveries. Each fragment serves as a reminder that the missing work has not entirely disappeared. It remains scattered. The survival of medieval manuscripts adds another layer to the mystery. Many classical texts endured because monks carefully copied them within European monasteries. Their choices determined which authors reached the modern world. Did complete copies of Livy's missing books once exist inside monasteries whose libraries later burned? Were manuscripts destroyed during Viking raids, invasions, fires, or religious conflicts? Or did they simply decay unnoticed after centuries without being recopied? No one knows. Ancient catalogs occasionally deepen the mystery. Several medieval inventories mention works now entirely lost. Some descriptions appear vague enough that historians cannot determine whether they referred to complete books of Livy, abbreviated versions, or entirely different texts. The uncertainty has encouraged careful investigation for generations. Renaissance scholars searched tirelessly for forgotten manuscripts. Humanists traveled from monastery to monastery across Europe, examining neglected collections in hopes of rediscovering lost classical works. Their efforts achieved remarkable successes. Complete writings by Cicero, Quintilian, Tacitus, Lucretius, and many other ancient authors emerged from forgotten shelves after centuries of obscurity. Each rediscovered manuscript transformed understanding of the ancient world. Naturally, scholars hoped Livy's missing books might also reappear. Yet, despite centuries of searching, the great gaps remain. Some researchers believe complete copies probably survived well into the early Middle Ages before gradually disappearing through neglect. Others point toward political instability. Libraries suffered repeated destruction throughout late antiquity. Wars, invasions, accidental fires, and changing educational priorities all reduced opportunities for preserving massive historical works. There is also the question of language. As Latin literacy declined in parts of Europe, fewer readers possessed the ability or incentive to reproduce enormous classical histories. Smaller collections, religious writings, and practical legal texts often received priority. The missing books quietly slipped into silence. Still, archaeology continues to surprise. Hidden manuscript chambers have been discovered beneath monasteries. Sealed jars have preserved papyrus scrolls for millennia. Private libraries forgotten behind collapsed walls have occasionally emerged almost intact. Even today, museum collections contain thousands of unpublished manuscript fragments awaiting detailed study. Some remain unidentified because they preserve only a handful of damaged lines. Others have never been fully photographed or digitized. Modern technology has transformed this search. Multispectral imaging reveals faded ink invisible to ordinary light. Artificial intelligence assists scholars by comparing tiny textual fragments against surviving quotations. Digital reconstruction allows damaged manuscripts separated across different collections to be virtually reunited. Every advance increases the possibility that overlooked fragments of Livy may already exist within archives around the world. One particularly intriguing source involves palimpsests. Parchment was expensive. During the Middle Ages, older manuscripts were sometimes scraped clean and reused for new writing. To medieval scribes, preserving usable parchment often mattered more than retaining older texts. Modern imaging has revealed erased works hidden beneath later writings. Several important classical texts have already reappeared through this process. Could additional books of Livy still sleep beneath medieval prayers, legal documents, or theological commentaries? The possibility remains very real. More speculative theories occasionally venture beyond accepted scholarship. Some imagine that complete copies reached distant monasteries in the Eastern Mediterranean before disappearing into forgotten archives. Others suggest that private collections assembled by wealthy Roman families may have remained hidden during periods of invasion, their contents still buried beneath collapsed villas awaiting excavation. There are even stories, unsupported by evidence but repeated through generations, of sealed underground libraries containing untouched collections of classical literature hidden during times of political turmoil. No archaeological discovery has confirmed such legends. Yet, history repeatedly demonstrates that remarkable libraries can survive in extraordinary circumstances. The Nag Hammadi manuscripts remained concealed for over 15 centuries. The Dead Sea Scrolls rested unnoticed inside desert caves for nearly 2,000 years. The Herculaneum papyri endured beneath volcanic ash until the 18th century. Each discovery seemed almost impossible before it occurred. The mystery surrounding Livy's lost books also reflects a deeper question about historical memory itself. How much of the ancient world has disappeared simply because no one copied it one final time? How many eyewitness accounts vanished because a manuscript became damp? Because a shelf collapsed? Because one monastery burned? Because one scribe chose another text instead? History often appears complete when viewed through surviving books. In reality, it resembles a mosaic missing countless pieces. Livy's missing volumes illustrate this perfectly. We possess enough to recognize the greatness of the original work. Yet, we lack so much that entire chapters of Roman history remain filtered through later writers whose perspectives differed significantly from his own. What debates might Livy have preserved? Which speeches? Which local traditions? Which eyewitness accounts no longer exist anywhere else? Perhaps the greatest mystery is not merely what the missing books contained, but how differently we might understand Rome if they still survived. Would familiar historical figures appear in a new light? Would forgotten individuals emerge from obscurity? Would accepted interpretations require revision? Or would the missing books simply confirm what later historians have already described? No one can answer. For now, the silence remains. Across monastery archives, museum storerooms, archaeological excavations, buried villas, forgotten papyrus collections, and unopened manuscript chests, fragments of the ancient world continue waiting for careful examination. Somewhere among them may rest another page, copied by a patient scribe nearly 2,000 years ago, preserving words no modern reader has seen for centuries. If that page is ever found, it will not merely restore part of Livy's masterpiece. It will reopen a conversation interrupted by time itself, allowing one of Rome's greatest historians to speak again after an absence that has lasted nearly 2 millennia. One of the most fascinating aspects of Livy's lost books is the way their disappearance reminds us that history is not simply a collection of facts, but a fragile chain of preservation. Every surviving ancient text represents countless acts of human effort across centuries. A single manuscript had to be copied by one generation, protected by another, transported across regions, rescued from disasters, and finally preserved long enough to reach the modern world. If even one link in that chain failed, an entire work could disappear forever. Livy's missing volumes demonstrate this reality more clearly than almost any other example from classical antiquity. Although historians have reconstructed portions of Roman history using the writings of other authors such as Polybius, Sallust, Appian, Plutarch, Cassius Dio, and Tacitus, every historian viewed events through a unique perspective shaped by personal experiences, political circumstances, and literary goals. Livy's approach combined patriotism, moral reflection, and dramatic storytelling, creating narratives that sought not only to explain historical events, but also to teach readers about virtue, leadership, ambition, and the consequences of human choices. The absence of more than 100 books, therefore, represents far more than missing information. It represents the loss of an individual voice that interpreted one of history's greatest civilizations. Modern scholarship continues to search for clues hidden in quotations, summaries, and indirect references preserved by later writers. Occasionally, scholars notice that an author appears to quote Livy using wording that differs from surviving manuscripts, suggesting that alternative versions or now lost passages once circulated. Such discoveries may seem minor, yet they provide valuable evidence for reconstructing the broader tradition of ancient historical writing. Furthermore, advances in digital humanities have transformed the search for lost literature. Massive online databases now allow researchers to compare millions of words from surviving Latin texts within seconds, identifying possible quotations or parallels that earlier generations could easily have overlooked. Machine learning algorithms can recognize patterns in damaged manuscripts, estimate missing letters, and even suggest probable reconstructions based on Livy's surviving style. While these technologies cannot recreate books that no longer exist, they significantly improve the chances of identifying overlooked fragments scattered among museum collections worldwide. Another important consideration is the educational role of Livy's work throughout Roman society. For centuries, students learned rhetoric and moral philosophy through carefully selected passages from his history. Statesmen admired examples of courage displayed by early Roman leaders, while military commanders reflected upon campaigns described in vivid detail. The missing books almost certainly contained countless speeches, political debates, and descriptions of military strategy that influenced generations before disappearing from the historical record. Their loss, therefore, affects not only our understanding of events, but also our appreciation of Roman education, literature, and intellectual culture. Historians must continually remind themselves that surviving evidence represents only a fraction of what once existed. Archaeological discoveries repeatedly prove that remarkable finds remain possible even after centuries of searching. A forgotten monastery archive, an unopened storage box in a museum, or an overlooked papyrus fragment may contain lines capable of reshaping established interpretations. This possibility encourages careful optimism rather than unrealistic expectation. Most scholars agree that the complete recovery of Livy's missing books is unlikely, yet history has repeatedly surprised experts with discoveries once considered impossible. The rediscovery of lost speeches by Cicero, previously unknown poems, and forgotten historical fragments demonstrates that the ancient world still possesses the ability to reveal unexpected treasures. Beyond their historical value, Livy's lost books also raise philosophical questions about cultural memory and human civilization. Every generation decides which knowledge deserves preservation, whether intentionally or through practical necessity. The survival of certain works while others vanished reminds us that cultural heritage is shaped not only by greatness, but also by circumstance, chance, and ordinary human decisions.